It's unlikely that anyone has ever tried to hide a zombie, and hiding a zombie among humans is incredibly difficult. Even secrets about who was having an affair with whom were spread very widely thanks to stupid rumors. However, they didn't touch on the story of how the children of aristocrats one day turned into zombies, and if the heroine could only ask someone for help. But who could give advice to someone who suddenly had zombies in their family? So the story's main character decided to write a guide for those who simply needed to hide zombies as quickly as possible. At the Belond Empire's grand evening, an atmosphere of pomp and sophistication reigned in the banquet hall. One of the aristocrats admired that Lady Julia's skin today was like white jade, and it was incredibly eye-catching. Julia Walker, the Duchy's third daughter, a lady with pink hair and pale porcelain skin, was the very embodiment of refinement and sophistication. The fourth daughter, Emily, remarked that the lady had a very keen eye, since she decided to make such an unusual compliment. The lady admitted that her sister Julia has been paying a lot of attention to her beauty lately, so the girl looks simply flawless. She couldn't help but tell how well Julia chose the earrings, which simply sparkled and matched her outfit. The lady asked if these were earrings with the finest rubies, and they said they came from the Quan Main diamond mine. First of all, zombies always have pale skin, so if you become a zombie, you need to pay attention to your makeup. It wasn't only in Julia's appearance that oddities were noticed, because one of the respectable gentlemen, shaking Isaac's hand, noted that his palm was very cold. The second son of the Duke of Walker, named Isaac Walker, was also present at the grand event. When he shook his hand, he didn't even imagine that he might notice his body temperature. Firstly, zombies always had a low body temperature, so it was imperative to avoid physical contact as much as possible. He smiled and admitted that he had been holding a glass of cold drink in his hand the whole time, and that was probably why his hands were cold. To prevent anyone from finding out that you had become a zombie, Emily carefully warned everyone before the ball to act like normal people. The next moment something happened that no one expected. A broken crystal glass of wine fell to the floor. The young man politely asked for forgiveness. It was entirely his fault, and he was very worried that the gentleman could get hurt. The firstborn and head of the Walker Duchy, Edmund Walker, looked in surprise at his hand, which was stained with red wine. Emily immediately came to the rescue. She poured red wine on a white napkin so that no one would notice. She placed a red napkin on her brother's hand and asked if he was okay, because the zombie had another peculiarity. Thirdly, zombies don't have any blood at all, so you have to make sure they don't get hurt, and people don't notice the trick. She quickly managed to make it look like her brother's hand was actually bleeding. One of the men ran up to them, noticing that something had clearly happened to the Duke, and this moment required his attention. He said he was fine, but since this had happened, they would probably have to leave now, and he apologized. The man thanked her for accepting the ducal family's invitation to the gala event, and the heroine hoped that this guide would be useful someday. The family didn't stay at the ball for long, but during that time they were already tired, because their main goal was to make sure people didn't understand who they really were. You may think this will never happen to you, and that you will hardly ever need this guide in your life. Unfortunately, you never know how things will turn out, and Emily's biggest fear was that they might get caught. Emily was sure she had once thought the same thing, until just last week, when their lives had changed dramatically. Her sister and brothers were ordinary people, but unfortunately they had to start a completely new life. A new one, previously unknown to any of them, where they now had to hide so that no one would find out how they became zombies. So Emily diligently kept a diary and kept an eye on all her brothers and sister, trying to make their lives at least a little happier. It happened a week ago, and it's hard to believe that just recently their family were ordinary people, but at some point, opening her eyes, Emily realized that she was in the forest. Their family gathered for their younger brother's entrance ceremony into the academy, and everyone was incredibly anticipating this event. They were late for the start of the celebration, so they decided to take a shortcut to at least make it on time. Just as the second brother Isaac was joking that their black cat, Leo, had gained weight, the carriage suddenly began to shake violently. Sensing danger, Isaac first pushed his sister Emily out of the carriage so that she could be saved if the carriage overturned. So when the lady opened her eyes, she realized that right now her brother and the others were not next to her. She was lying on the grass completely alone, but fortunately she was alive, although she could not say for sure whether a tragedy had happened to her loved ones. In the most hidden corner of the forest, people heard voices right next to them, and silhouettes of people in black robes appeared behind the bushes. They were saying something about death, and black crows were circling around them, their cries echoing throughout the forest. the strangers whispered. It seemed like everyone inside the carriage had turned to mush, and as if that was their main goal. All this time Emily tried to hide so that no one would notice her, but she understood that tragedy was very close. As soon as the strange strangers left, she went in search of the carriage and saw what was left of it quite nearby. She stood there, unable to move, paralyzed by grief and horror, her throat dry, and Emily tried to scream, but only a weak, hoarse sound came out. She found the carriage in which her brothers and sister were riding and was horrified. There was blood all around, the remains of body parts of her family, and it pierced her with a cold blade. The reality of what was happening fell upon her with all its weight. Moments of happiness, laughter, hopes. All of this was torn to shreds along with the bodies of her loved ones. Approaching the body of her sister Julia, she saw blood everywhere and a huge branch that had pierced her fragile body. Julia's face was completely covered in blood, and she didn't even have a single chance to survive. Twisted metal, shreds of clothing, everything testified to the suddenness of what had happened, the unbearable silence broken by her ragged breathing. Emily cried bitterly and wanted her brothers to answer her. Anyone. Her voice was drowned in the silence of the forest, empty and lonely, like the echo of a broken heart. In response, there was only silence, thick and oppressive. She walked around the remains of the carriage, stumbling over the debris, hoping to find at least something that gave life. Finally, she heard a strange rustling sound and realized that the only survivor was a large black cat named Leo. The cat stepped out of the carriage with a leisurely air and was sure that they had indeed arrived, but soon he saw bloody footprints everywhere. Leo's carefully licked fur became ruffled, and he was extremely unhappy about this, but a much more terrible situation happened. Emily cried bitterly. No one expected a terrible tragedy, and the cat confirmed once again that people die quite easily. And he was her only hope. This black cat could really help her, because he had magical powers. Lev asked the young contractor, who was Emily, what she now wanted from their union and what she wanted to do with her family. Slowly but surely, Emily rose to her feet. She wiped away her tears, took a deep breath and exhaled. She needed to calm down. The only thing she wanted now was to bring her relatives back to life with the help of black magic. The National Academy's entrance ceremony had already been completed at the elite university, and all student spots were filled. Near the last desk stood a boy with sad eyes. He was crying, not understanding why all his relatives had abandoned him that day. This boy was the youngest son of the Walker Duchy, named Andrea, and a special boy with different colored eyes. He was sure that his family would not come, but suddenly he heard a familiar voice, and it was definitely his brother. Isaac apologized for being late and said that the carriage had broken down, so they had to wait a little longer. Andrea wondered why Isaac took off his glasses. He looked quite attractive without them, but it seemed strange. Andrea said his brother's face was too scary, so he should always wear glasses, and his brother affectionately called him a little rascal. Why did he see his beloved little sister, and he rejoiced even more, with all the childish carelessness. Brother Ed, Sister Julia, and Sister Emily arrived together, and they didn't forget to bring their black cat with them. Andrea noticed some changes, as if Sister Julia was ill and looked unwell. Smiling, the lady admitted that she was simply sick in the carriage and that she would definitely feel better soon. But most of all, Andrea was delighted to see the cat, who also wanted to congratulate him. Emily once again congratulated her brother on his admission to the academy, and it was a very significant day for everyone. It was upon entering the academy that the little Duke's life would change dramatically, and he really wanted to receive this education. The sunset over the Duchy of Walker painted the sky in unimaginable shades of yellow, and the family was ready to discuss the recent tragedy. They all gathered together in the main office and could finally discuss everything calmly. The two brothers and Julia wanted to know the truth, because literally that day their bodies had been torn to pieces. And it was clear to everyone that the sister had clearly taken part in this, and they wanted to know what exactly she had done to them. Emily decided to speak specifically, admitting that their current condition is truly radically different from that of ordinary people. To be more precise, from today onwards, her two brothers and sister have become real zombies. None of the ducal family could even guess why. After death, they still remained alive, and there was not a single scratch on any of them. Yulia was the most surprised, and was it really the nasty zombies she thought they were talking about? Could these really be the living dead, who growl and eat people, infecting each other in turn? But the sister tried to calm them down. They really became zombies, but not real ones. Emily had no other choice. Perhaps it would have been better to ask their consent first, but they were all dead, and she had to act without permission. Julia screamed. That wasn't the point at all, and she couldn't believe that this had actually happened to them. She didn't understand how this was even possible, and even a saint from the Holy See, who could make a colleague walk, was not able to resurrect the dead. Emily didn't resurrect them, and their current state is still closer to that of a dead body. Isaac stated that the girl's power, which had never been shown in her entire life, really lies in the ability to raise and control corpses. Emily believes it would be more accurate to say that her power now allows her to connect the souls of the dead with her living being. Emily could force the soul to obey her and place it in a new vessel, so she used corpses only because they were the only vessels available, and when the original body dies, the soul comes out of it, but she had to grab it tightly and bind it. Julia still couldn't believe that they really had died. There was a deathly silence in the office, and none of them even imagined that this could affect their family. Thinking about it, Edmund realized that this meant that their sister was now a real dark magician who could resurrect people. And there was nothing left to do but admit it so that the family would know the truth, but unfortunately, she had no other choice. Edmund slowly became enraged and slammed his hand on the table with all his might, admitting that this was pure nonsense. Yes, he was not used to being a zombie, and he didn't even expect that the next second his hand would simply fall off and fall to the floor. Yesterday he was still alive, laughing and making plans for the future, but today he is just a piece of rotting flesh. Now everything really became clear to him, and the heroes looked in horror at the severed arm, as if it had been torn off a doll. Julia screamed louder than anyone else. 300 years had passed since the dark magicians disappeared, but now one of them could appear so close. The most interesting thing is that their sister turned out to be a dark magician, and no one expected this from the ducal family. Their family, blessed by God's gratitude, is known for passing down special abilities through generations, but it was she who inherited black magic. And if not this, how can this phenomenon be explained? And obviously Julia also participated in this. So he understood. They really died today. Emily brought them back to life, but now they had one main problem. Dark magicians must be executed on the spot immediately after their discovery. Once the Holy See learns of this, none of them will be able to help. Julia suggested pretending to be dead and making it look like it wasn't an emergency, and then they could cope, and that was clearly better than exposing black magic. If they do this, the only people left in the Walker family will be Emily and their little brother Andrea. The lady was not recognized as an heir, so Andrea was the only heir, but unfortunately he was still very young. An heir who has not yet reached adulthood can hardly fully assert his rights, and this means that the elder will take on all obligations. So, no matter how you look at it, there was only one possible option left here, which everyone had to agree with. They have 7 years until Andrea comes of age, and during this time the heroes will have to do everything possible to ensure that no one reveals their secret. When he turns 18, then they will be able to do something, and only then can Andrea become a full-fledged heir. Isaac doubted that it was really possible. This body was in such bad condition that he wouldn't be surprised if his hand fell off while he was escorting someone. Edmund knew they simply had to do it, and at the moment they had no other choice. The tension between the family had eased a bit, and now Isaac was concerned with something else entirely. Apologizing for distracting from such a serious moment, the young man asked if there was any way to reattach his arm. There was a way, but it was only a temporary solution, since the vessels are corpses and they break very easily. Emily picked up his hand, placed it on his wrist, and warned him that it might sting a little. She had to bite her finger a little because a drop of the black mage's blood was needed to reattach her hand. Emily's blood shot up from her finger in a purple stream, and she frowned in concentration as she felt the magic weave threads between her essence and her brother's flesh. A purple glow enveloped the junction, gradually fading, leaving behind only pale skin and a thin scar. She knew it was only a temporary measure. The arm attached by magic would not function normally. Edmund was still a zombie, but at least he had an arm, and that was a good start. Looking at his sister, he could not believe that she possessed dark magical abilities, and such strong ones at that. Emily's parents had told her to keep the fact that she was a dark wizard a secret her whole life, and perhaps she shouldn't have been honest even with her family. She just wanted her brothers and sister to stay alive, and Edmund admitted that his sister had done a very good job. No matter what others say, her ability is a gift, and proof that she belongs to the Walker Duke family. Smiling, Edmund asked his beloved sister to hold her head high and that they would overcome all difficulties. At that moment, she felt incredible support. She always knew that her family would never betray her. That evening, the brothers decided to discuss why the terrible tragedy happened, since someone was clearly involved. Someone had definitely planted explosives in the carriage, and the strangers even checked to see if they were dead or not, and that meant only one thing: they would come again. Isaac did not understand who was behind this, perhaps another duchy, or perhaps the Belland imperial family. It could even be a throne. They didn't particularly favor them either, claiming that the blessing should belong only to the Holy Throne or something like that. The brothers understood that the state of their bodies was a big problem, but they also did not know when the next assassination attempt would occur. It was necessary to apply for leave through the butler, but too much had happened today, but the zombies did not feel tired. Literally one day, their lives changed dramatically, and Emily was forced to admit her talent. All this time, only one member of the ducal family knew the truth, and that was a fat black cat named Leo. He asked what fool could mistake dark magic for grace, since their foundations are completely different. He was sure Emily understood this perfectly well, but at the same time she spoke so shamelessly, as if her magic really was a gift. The black cat asked her how she felt after all this, when she had to tell the truth about herself, and her beloved relatives became zombies. And did she really feel at least a part of the almighty power, and want to conquer this entire continent? Emily stared at the talking black cat, and she also had one important question for him. Why would someone like him make a contract with her, a black magician, who would now be obligated to her for the rest of his life? The cat was indignant. She called him herself, and also asked him to help as soon as possible. Leo did not understand how the contractor, His Magnificence, could be so indecisive and try to prolong his life, fussing like a rat. This black cat was not an animal. It was a creature disguised as a domestic cat, but was actually a demon who had made a contract with her. He now claims to have possessed the corpse of a cat to avoid a causal disruption, though his true form is actually different. The demon was curious about what kind of bloodbath the man who summoned him after so long could cause. When he got here, he asked Emily not to laugh anymore, and Demon found it incredibly irritating. Considering that even a novice dark mage like Emily could summon a demon, it was unlikely that he had the right to complain after that. After these words, anger appeared in the black cat's eyes, his fur stood on end, and he shouted that he was ready to terminate this useless contract today. Early the next morning, little Andrea was seen off to his new life by his brothers and sisters. Today he was going to the academy to get the first knowledge he had long dreamed of. The whole family was incredibly worried about him, and Emily asked the boy to be careful. They watched the carriage leave, realizing that Andrea would certainly become the most wonderful student. The ducal Kolker family gathered for dinner, and for the first time, an uneasy silence hung in the air. Isaac decided to talk about the inability to sleep and how their bodies were quickly deteriorating, and the zombies had probably already noticed that they couldn't tell the difference between hot and cold when eating. The leave application should be on the captain's desk early this morning, and Isaac warned that if he tried to brew the potion in this state, it would lead to an accident. Edmund decided to find out what the chances were that the applications would be rejected, and they would be rejected. Isaac replied that the imperial court never turned down requests for leave, and he was confident that everything would be fine, and they certainly wouldn't be able to break tradition today. Emily was going to talk about this before she went to work. Since they would now need Emily's help, and if any questions arose, her brother hoped that her leave would be approved. It was just a matter of buying time, and if a higher level of dark magic could restore the bodies to their previous state. She will probably need time to learn dark magic separately, increasing her knowledge and talent. The brother promised to try to somehow get a book on dark magic so that his sister could easily practice right at home, improving her skills. And so, the heroes had roughly decided how to proceed, and they came up with this grandiose plan in just one night. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and the butler came to tell the Duke urgent news. The man bowed respectfully and warned that the gentleman's request for a second vacation had unfortunately been rejected. The food almost flew out of the heroes' mouths, and none of them expected that the application would be rejected. Isaac was angrily indignant at the reason why the application was rejected, and that simply could not happen. It was obvious that the butler was nervous, as he admitted that this was an order from His Highness the Crown Prince. Now they have even more problems, and it would be much better if everything went according to plan, but alas, that would be too much of a good thing. At work, Emily was waiting for a colleague who arrived later than usual today. The lady wished Jamie good morning, saying that she had some very important things to do that morning that simply could not be put off. She had to lie. Andrea was being capricious because she didn't want to go to the academy, and asked where His Highness the Crown Prince was. The crown prince was currently in a meeting. He was supposed to arrive very soon, and as soon as he said these words, he appeared at the threshold. Everyone greeted His Highness the Crown Prince, and today Emily had an important conversation with him. The Crown Prince looked incredibly elegant, his luxurious clothes decorated with gold embroidery. The gentleman sat down at his desk, asking his assistants to return to their work and not put off important matters. Now Emily needed to ask the Crown Prince for leave so that she would have time to help her family. She timidly asked if she could ask the gentleman one important question that required his attention. Having collected her thoughts, the lady turned to the gentleman and admitted that she would like to rest for a while. The young man wondered if the workload had turned out to be too much for the lady and that she was unable to cope with her work. Emily rarely took vacations, so the Crown Prince was curious about what had happened since she suddenly decided to take a break. If you remember, Sir Isaac also sent a leave application, and did they really have family problems? Emily admitted that nothing of the sort had happened. They had simply thought, why not go on holiday with the whole family? And she had some days left over. She could use them as she saw fit, but the Crown Prince was clearly beginning to suspect something. Emily was ready to sink into the ground, but the gentleman only quietly said that it might be difficult to do, and it was unlikely that he was ready to give her a vacation. Speaking of Sir Isaac, the Crown Prince ordered him to be vigilant because they might soon need the help of the knights. He couldn't reveal the official reason yet, but since Isaac's vacation had been cancelled, it would be difficult for the family to go on holiday together. The plans went down the drain, and Emily had no idea what to do now. If Brother Isaac had to work, perhaps she too would have to go to the Imperial Palace where her help was needed. She understood the gentleman perfectly, deciding to postpone her vacation until next time, but suddenly one of the knights burst into the office and began shouting something. There was fear on his face. The young man assured that the Crown Prince needed to go somewhere quickly because Sir Isaac was now in the knight's quarter. Emily was sure her brother was still at home, and this news sounded much more scary to her than the news that her family was now zombies. Without even suspecting what had happened to her brother Isaac, she began to worry, and was only afraid that other people would find out that her brother had become a walking corpse. Together with the Crown Prince, she had to go to the training ground where all the knights were now. It was good that no one revealed their secret, but for some reason the situation turned out unexpectedly. Before this, the Crown Prince tried to find out from Mr. Werner what had happened and why he needed to go to the site so urgently. The young man said that Sir Isaac and Sir Harold were about to have a sparring match right now. They should definitely watch it. This was certainly not in the Crown Prince's plans, and he was even surprised why they decided to do this now. It was a sight not to be missed, and for a long time there were disputes about who was the strongest knight, but they never fought each other. Therefore, the disputes still did not subside, and in connection with this, Werner still left it to Sir Harold. Werner didn't even notice that his sister was standing in the office. He apologized, and last time he bet on her brother. Emily was sure that in any case, if the Crown Prince did not go to watch the duel, perhaps this could still be resolved. Putting all his affairs aside, for some reason the gentleman decided to go with them, and he clearly wanted to see what would happen there. The prince rose from his seat. The gentleman suggested leaving right away, and Werner knew perfectly well that the gentleman would agree. The Crown Prince was once also one of the ordinary knights, and it was for this reason that he could not refuse. Werner also invited the lady to join him to watch her brother spar. Usually she would have refused such offers, but now the situation was becoming dire, and it was necessary to stop this duel. The knights were already ready to begin sparring, standing opposite each other with wooden swords. Isaac held the sword with both hands, and on his wrist were visible the scars of his recently severed hands. He knew perfectly well that he shouldn't have given in to this provocation, but now he had no other choice. The sparring would hardly have happened if it weren't for his insolent partner, who called Emily's sister a talentless piece of trash. One day, the young man declared that she was already of the right age and should be sent to a worthy family, and she even thought about sending an official proposal soon, knowing that the Walker family only accepted sons-in-law. Isaac couldn't let Emily deserve to hear such nasty things from a complete stranger. The sparring was about to begin. The knight asked both sides to bow and each of the partners to get ready. Isaac knew his arm could fall off again at any moment, but he certainly couldn't cancel this duel. Looking at her brother, Emily was incredibly worried, and she couldn't even imagine what to do to prevent this from happening. Suddenly, the Crown Prince asked if her brother was really sick and that he looked just awful. At first, Emily was afraid that they were talking about her, and even shuddered at such a strange question. She said that her brother mentioned that his stomach had been bothering him for several days, and perhaps he had eaten something wrong and was unlikely to feel well. Even the knight Werner noticed that Isaac looked bad, his complexion was bad, and he was simply deathly pale. This changed everything. Werner decided to bet on Harold, and someone was praying for Isaac to win, and a large sum was already bet on him. The start of the tournament was announced, and all the spectators watched with interest the sparring between the two strongest participants. Sir Harold began sparring and rushed towards Isaac with fury, wanting to defeat him, driven by pride and the desire to prove his superiority. Isaac had not expected the young man to attack him with such confidence, but he had far more skill. He parried Harold's attacks with the grace of a master, his every movement revealing a deep understanding of the art of combat. Harold, seeing that his onslaught was not producing results, began to lose patience, his rage giving way to annoyance and then panic. Isaac blocked well enough, but his sword was too light compared to his usual one, and Harold wondered if he couldn't put any power into it. Harold's rage seemed to only fuel Isaac's composure, and the spectators continued to watch this exciting fight. Emily was incredibly worried, and knew that this couldn't go on, because she knew his arm could just fall off at any moment. The lady couldn't let everyone see how his hand simply fell off right in the center of the training ground. Perhaps this could be called revenge for the fact that she once did not listen to the lion demon, and now she simply did not know what to do. As a powerful dark mage, she had enough knowledge to somehow end this battle. After releasing her blood from her palm, she was sure that this would definitely work. The dark mage's blood rushed upwards towards the ceiling in a purple vortex, and Emily had already come up with a good plan. She turned to the demon, who was simply obliged to help her, and asked him to come and break the chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Brother Isaac had to be able to avoid this sparring, and she had very little time left. Harold suddenly declared that his partner was simply dodging like a rat and decided to finally put an end to this. The opponent asked him to wait, not wanting to use the aura of the magic sword in such a duel. Harold's rage was already beyond all acceptable limits, and he angrily shouted that in that case he would be the one to do it. The chandelier, which was firmly attached to the ceiling, slowly began to move and was ready to fall right in front of the heroes. Emily's magical powers enveloped the chandelier, and the demon needed to make it fall as quickly as possible. Literally a second later, the chandelier fell onto the training ground, and everyone looked on in bewilderment as to why it fell at such an important moment. It was not clear who had won, Sir Harold or Sir Isaac, but only thanks to this, the sparring was stopped. Harold's dark figure, angry and disappointed, stood right in the center of the knight's square. He was shaking all over, but if it hadn't been for the sprat, the chandelier would have fallen right on his head, and who knows how it would have ended. Seeing the chandelier rapidly falling down, Isaac pushed his opponent away, thereby saving his life. This only made the young man even more angry. He seemed to pose no threat to his opponent, and instead of rejoicing, he suggested having another fair duel. The Crown Prince declared it a miracle that no one was hurt in such an incident, and suggested that the participants end this ridiculous competition. The knights could not disobey their master, and bowing their heads they confirmed his opinion. A heavy chandelier made a huge hole in the concrete floor, and the Crown Prince asked the knights to go to the infirmary, assigning responsibility for cleaning the training grounds. Isaac asked if the gentleman would allow him to return home early so that he could call the doctor and check his condition. The young man really did look pale. It was impossible not to notice, and His Highness gave him the opportunity to rest. The brother thanked his sister with his eyes, realizing that all the credit belonged to her alone, and if it weren't for her, his arm would have definitely fallen off. Together with the Crown Prince, Emily returned back to continue her work. She was incredibly happy that she had managed to help Isaac, who was literally one step away from failure. His Majesty turned to the lady, and she even became afraid that she had sighed too loudly. The young man turned to her and confidently stated that it seemed she had also noticed something strange. Duke Walker's family has had the blessing for generations, which is not particularly surprising, so the hereditary principal has put the knighthood on high alert. Unfortunately, now she understood what he wanted to say, because in her head there was only one thought so that no one would find out that her brother had become a zombie. It turned out that the gentleman understood everything. He asked Emily not to interfere too much with this, but if she had the ability to read the remnants of dark magic. Now Emily was really scared. Did the Crown Prince really manage to understand everything in just a few minutes? And most of all, she didn't want to be caught this time. It was not for nothing that the hereditary principal had lured her into a secluded garden, and he definitely wanted to talk about something. Knight Werner stood behind her, and Emily began to realize she was surrounded, looking the Crown Prince straight in the eyes. The knight noticed that His Highness had probably frightened the young lady when it came to dark mages. He had already told him more than once that it was precisely because of his gloomy expression that all the young ladies ran away, but the gentleman did not want to frighten her at all. Judging by the fact that the atmosphere was not hostile, it seems Emily was not caught, but how many more times will she be surprised today? Werner turned to the young lady and asked her not to hide and to tell him if she really knew something. They noticed that during the sparring, the lady knew in advance that the chandelier was about to fall. She looked at the ceiling even before it fell, and this was absolutely true. They believed that dark magicians had started to act again recently, so they decided to conduct a comprehensive study, but they encountered many restrictions. Although several tracking tools have been used, their use has been limited, and most are single-use. Werner admitted that this case was definitely the same, and he was absolutely sure of it. Just by the way, he used this instrument to measure, and it showed that dark magic was indeed detected at that moment. As it turned out, they thought the young lady had a natural ability to sense dark magic in advance, but only Emily knew the truth. Werner offered the lady to assist in the research in order to finally find out who was hiding under the mask of the dark magician. For some reason, they looked at her with such anticipation, and Emily couldn't say no, but on the other hand, it just drove her crazy. They asked a dark magician to help them find a dark magician, and these people clearly don't understand what they're talking about. Emily was just a secretary. She did her job diligently and was the best at her job. The Crown Prince offered to provide a separate payment for overtime if only Emily would agree to help them. She had no reason to refuse, so the lady agreed to take part in the study. Werner decided to explain the situation in detail and even suggested moving to another place so that no one would see them. They went to the secret meeting room, and the lady asked what they meant by their assumption about dark magicians. Just as it sounded, the heroes discovered several traces that definitely indicate that dark magic is at work again. All the dark magicians were imprisoned on a secluded island after a sacred battle a very long time ago, about 300 years ago. 300 years is a period during which much could have been forgotten. The power of the papacy was still strikingly different, and ironically, without the dark magicians, the papacy would be meaningless. Once the papacy occupied part of the lands of the Belond Empire, preparing for the resurrection of dark magicians, the heroes were revising the treaty on land rights, and the approaching autumn of this year will turn out to be the date of negotiations. Emily warned that in that case the Empire intends not to renew the contract at the upcoming negotiation date, and the Crown Prince confirmed her words. The lady still didn't understand. They said that they found traces of dark magic being activated. In the knight's opinion, this was the most difficult part, and this is what they wanted to tell her. Dark magicians are no different from ordinary people, and only clerics can sense the remnants of dark magic. On the table lay a transparent magic ball, a measuring instrument that had also been created in the papacy. So if the papacy claims that dark magic has appeared, I have no choice but to confirm their suspicions. Thinking about it, Emily realized that this meant they weren't moving because they understood everything. On the other hand, this was a huge success for her family, which meant that the imperial family had no way of finding dark magicians unless the papacy helped them, and the lady only had to play along. Unexpectedly, the young men said that the most recent tracks were recently found in the middle of the Loudon Mountains, where the terrible tragedy occurred. Emily choked on her tea in surprise, and the knight asked if she was okay. She admitted that she was just a little surprised. The Loudon Mountains were not far from here, which meant that the dark mages were very close. The mountains are located to the west of the capital. If you cross this mountain range, you can immediately get to the Campbell Marquisate. So many people travel back and forth, and this is quite serious. The girl's younger brother often went to the academy and traveled there, and Werner asked her not to worry, and the capital's guards were protecting the territory with special zeal. When Werner went there on his own, the measuring instrument they were using started to emit a red light and flash, and it seemed like there were traces of powerful dark energy left there. The Crown Prince assumed that this was enough of an explanation and asked Emily to go and pack her things. Tomorrow morning she had to go to the mountains with them so that she could go there personally and confirm the presence of dark magic. Tomorrow was a big holiday, but Emily didn't understand why it was worth going now. That's why the gentleman decided to go there, and if they both disappeared in the middle of the week, it would definitely be suspicious. Emily had no choice but to agree, and the Crown Prince could well be called the worst boss in the world. Today was an incredibly hard day. Emily simply collapsed on her bed, exhausted, and various thoughts could not leave her head. If Isaac's hand fell off today, it would be proof of dark magic, and who knows what the Crown Prince would do with them. What she regretted most was that she could not improve her brother's body, as she did not have the strength to do so. She decided to turn to Demon, her black cat, and perhaps he could help her somehow. The lion lay on a cozy, soft pillow. He involuntarily stretched and asked why the lady decided to call him. No one could know dark magic better than the demon himself, so the lady decided to ask him. The demon liked this idea, and he wanted to know if the mistress was really ready to learn the great techniques of this body. Now she was truly sure that she would need the knowledge of the demon himself in order to somehow help her family. The demon confessed that it was worth listening to him from the beginning, and then her relatives would not have found themselves in such a ridiculous position. Still not quite sure if she had done the right thing, Emily knew she needed power now, immediately. And if we take Isaac's hand into account, it would be possible to temporarily strengthen something with magic, so that their bodies don't fall apart. With a sly smile, the demon admitted that there was only one way to prevent the corpse from weakening and rotting. A real sacrifice must be made, and this will only work if it is the corpse of a person who has just died. The lady had long been familiar with dark magic, but she would not have wanted to sacrifice anyone, much less torment any corpses. She asked if there really wasn't another way that could preserve a zombie's body. If Emily didn't want to, she would need to learn to freely control demonic energy, but the demon assured her that it would take quite a long time. Emily was a natural-born dark mage, a contractor, but she never delved into the fundamentals, much less learned how to control energy. Even if she didn't devote time to training, she must have awakened the demonic energy that had been flowing through her veins since childhood. This energy manifests differently for each dark magician. Some raise the dead, while others can invade a person's mind. So the demon suggested starting with the practice of extracting his demonic energy. Or she will still have to sacrifice someone, unfortunately. There was, is, and never will be another way for a born dark magician. An incredible burden of responsibility fell on her shoulders, and Emily only wanted the demon to teach her how to extract demonic energy. And she was ready to do anything, just so that no one would ever find out that her beloved brothers and sister had long since passed away. Early in the morning, the Crown Prince, the Knight, and Emily set out into the mountains to find and prove the presence of dark mages. Werner warned that before they arrived, the lady could rest and gain strength. He probably noticed that she looked unwell, and indeed, the heroine slept very poorly that night. It was understandable after what he had heard yesterday, and Werner thought that the young lady was definitely scared. It was the first time the Crown Prince had seen her so tired, because Emily was always energetic, cheerful, and she was never tired. In fact, the demon devoured so much of her demonic energy yesterday that the heroine was simply tired to death while trying to master at least some skills. She tried to gather her strength. Now she had important work to do, but she understood that now she would find herself in the very place where something had recently happened. Soon they arrived. The venerable knight offered the lady his hand, a video of the tired state she was in. The girl's legs were shaking. She tried to hide her feelings, and out of the corner of her eye she saw that very place. There was blood everywhere, strange fragments were lying on the grass, and the atmosphere around the place was not pleasant. The lady wondered if these people had really left everything in such a ruined state, and it was very suspicious. The magic ball in the knight's hands glowed with a scarlet light. It was a red signal signaling danger. It seemed like there had been an incident here recently, and Emily asked if the nearby guards had received any reports. With such a serious incident, someone was bound to be injured, but no one sought medical attention, as they were told. Judging by the remaining bloodstains, someone was definitely here, but there are no wounded or corpses, and traces of dark magic remain. The Crown Prince suspected that innocent citizens of the Empire could be used as consumables for dark magic, and he was half right. He asked Emily if she had seen or felt anything, but she only replied that it was very difficult for her to say. And if she says yes right now, it will confirm that dark magic exists, but if she says no, the papal chancery will accuse the imperial family of blasphemy. At that moment, not only Emily, but everyone else felt something, and it was definitely the remnants of black magic. His Highness looked at Mr. Werner, asking if he had really felt it too. Without a doubt, an unwanted guest had arrived, and the knight belligerently drew his sword. The Crown Prince asked the lady not to go too far from him, because no one knew what they were about to face. The knight offered to leave this matter to him, claiming that he could handle it himself, and that everyone else should wait in the carriage. There were 5 strangers, but he was never afraid of danger, and nothing could restore him. Grabbing Emily's hand, the gentleman quickly ran towards the shelter, and was confident that the assistant would definitely cope. They hid in the carriage, and sitting opposite each other, they had no idea what was happening outside it. All this time they were silent and waiting for something to become clear, and she did not at all expect that she would find herself in such a strange situation. The gentleman assured them that he had no reason to worry at all. The knight would deal with the people who clearly wished them harm. Unfortunately, His Highness did not know where the dark magic leak originated, and it was unusual for him to encounter uninvited guests. Emily wondered if such things happened often, but the stranger must have found the thought of the son of heretics becoming emperor unbearable. The crown prince was named Tristan Belland. He was the sole heir to this vast land that occupied a quarter of the continent and was the only son of the current emperor. Having no brothers or sisters, he became the crown prince without any problems with the succession, but nothing in this world comes easy. Tristan's mother converted to the imperial faith when she arrived here, but the empress was still born in another kingdom, and that caused problems. Finally, everything calmed down, and it seemed that the knight really managed to sort out all the troubles. Tristan suggested going to see how it all ended, and maybe right now he would be able to find out the truth. Emily noticed that Tristan looked exhausted, and even the always perfect crown prince was still usually human. They quietly got out of the carriage and headed straight towards Werner, where a battle had clearly just taken place. Immediately, the heroine felt a terrible, strong smell of blood, which was absolutely everywhere, and it was impossible to hide from it. Werner tried to cover the girl's eyes with his hand, and it was unlikely that she would want to see this terrible sight. He warned her that this was not a suitable sight for her eyes, and that it was better for the young lady's psyche not to know what had happened here. The first thing he did was ask if there were any survivors left, so that they could ask someone. But they all lost their lives, the knight said. Capture was impossible, and even if they had caught them, it certainly wouldn't have changed anything. The knight still held his hand over the lady's eyes, but out of the corner of her eye she saw that the green grass was sprinkled with blood everywhere. Now they needed to do something with the bodies. Tristan suggested burying them, and nothing good would come from stirring up trouble. This time, Werner came prepared. He put the shovel in the carriage and asked the lady not to look at the corpses, suggesting that she just stay inside. Emily was still curious about who these people were and why they decided to attack them right now. She still saw the bodies lying on the grass out of the corner of her eye, and thought that these pipes could very well have been used as sacrifices. The demon recently warned that the only way she could improve the condition of her relatives' bodies was by sacrificing someone. So it was incredibly sad to just bury them when she could have easily taken advantage of this chance. She was still staring at the corpses and didn't even notice Werner turning to her. Emily apologized, admitting she felt a little dizzy, and asked permission to rest a little in the carriage. Tristan wanted to find out if she had managed to sense any remnants of the dark magic that should definitely be present here. Werner was indignant should the gentleman really demand this from a man whose heart ached just from the sight of corpses. He was sure the girl needed time to recover, but looking at Tristan, Emily couldn't even understand what he was thinking about now. She admitted that she was hesitant about whether to talk about it or not, but she felt that her answer could make a big difference. Since His Highness had already guessed about some points, the lady stated that she could no longer hide certain information. She had to say that in this forest she felt absolutely nothing, no dark energy. Maybe she had said the right answer, and Emily just wanted Tristan to stop staring at her so hard. He confirmed that all his conjectures turned out to be true. That is exactly what he thought, and all of this was organized by the Holy See. The very place of this incident was a trap. From the very beginning, someone simply wanted to lure them here. Werner did not understand how the gentleman could be sure of this, because there was absolutely no evidence. Tristan showed the neck of one of the corpses and asked the heroes to look at the marks, which spoke volumes. This man had a holy mark on the back of his head, and it was unlikely that any ordinary person could receive it. This was a clear sign that he belonged to the Holy See, and this symbol was given only to ministers. After death, the mark would disappear almost completely, so even if the bodies were presented for trial, the spot would simply look like an undefined spot. It was quite clever, and Werner realized that these people were covering up the evidence, but leaving an important warning. Leaving the corpses lying on the ground, Tristan declared that there was nothing more to see here, and suggested that the heroes return back. Emily asked what to do with the things and whether they were just going to leave them here in the forest. The knight decided to simply bury them for now, and then ask another team to remove all traces. Emily felt incredibly sorry to part with such a good opportunity, when right at her feet lay what she now desperately needed. If she leaves this corpse, when will she ever get another chance to find something like this without getting involved and killing anyone? Where there is light in the world, there is also darkness, and this was the main law of the supreme powers. After the Holy Battle, the empire entered an era of peace and prosperity, but the nobles began to yearn for something more exciting. Unfortunately, this created business for similar earthly traders, and as a result, the empire's underground world became the largest black market on the continent. Because dirty money was linked to various noble groups, it was said that the imperial family could only watch, unable to eradicate this evil. Or they just said that because they had actually given up, and that allowed a market boss named Donald to start playing big. One ordinary day, his assistant informed Mr. Donald that an uninvited guest had arrived and was asking for his time. Donald had no consultations scheduled for today. The guest arrived unannounced, and he asked what they should do now. The young man became indignant, declaring that there was no warning, no time, and that he did not have a single free minute. The assistant assured him that the guest outside was no ordinary person, and he understood perfectly well that Donald never received invited guests. Edmund appeared in his office in a black robe, indignant that Donald really dared to treat his guests like that. Donald immediately noticed that the young man's coat was made of incredibly expensive fabric, and his shoes were from a famous designer. It definitely had to be an aristocrat, and Donald said that if he had known someone of that caliber was coming, he would have greeted them personally. Inquiring what brought such a high-ranking guest to this humble place, Donald was ready to discuss, but Emily could not believe that brother Edmund knew of such a place. When talking to his brother, he stated that his sister did the right thing when she did not touch the corpse, otherwise the crown prince might have sensed something was wrong. However, she warned that the corpse simply could not be avoided, and this was the only chance to help them. That evening, Emily put on her coat, knowing she would have to deal with this on her own. So they decided to go together to finally solve the main question: how to sacrifice people without killing them. Edmund put his hand in his pocket and showed Donald something he knew very well. As soon as Donald saw it, he immediately understood everything, because this thing was really very valuable to the person who had it. It was a wooden tablet on which were engraved letters, the sign of a noble patron. The young man asked if Donald had forgotten the promise he had once made to his patron, but he only assured him that he had seen it for the first time. Anyone who brings this token does not need to bring anything, because they will simply be given what they ask for. But once, as a child, Donald heard that the syndicate was founded after meeting a great benefactor, and before this man passed away, he stole a duplicate ledger. There are records that are better left buried, and if they are discovered, problems will arise. Donald understood that he had no right to refuse, and only sullenly asked what the gentleman wanted to receive. From that moment on, the real bargaining began. Edmund just smiled and was ready to tell what he needed. Donald suggested that he probably needed advice on a property worth a fortune, and that it was a loss, but if the syndicate's secrets were to be kept, then so be it. He certainly didn't expect to hear the gentleman in the expensive coat declare that he needed to get a corpse as soon as possible. Donald could get anything he wanted, but the man had high prices, and he only asked the gentleman to name his price. He had in mind a human corpse, and it was the first such request that had been made to Donald. He also ordered that all possible information about dark magic be collected, but Donald understood that if this was discovered, he would face immediate execution. Since cremation became commonplace after battles, corpses or artifacts were now incredibly difficult to obtain. Dark magic was completely forbidden, and Donald wondered what these people were going to do with this information. Edmund didn't intend to go into details and presented his sword straight to Donald's throat. Not expecting that things could turn out this way for him, Donald only promised that he would definitely do everything, and this was a wise decision on his part. Edmund left a magic ball and asked for progress reports via communicator and to hand over the handset by the end of the week. The deal was fully agreed upon. Edmund and his sister left the office, declaring that they were counting on this man. Emily turned around and wished him luck before leaving, and everyone was sure he had no chance to get out of it. For his part, Donald was well aware that after this deal he could say goodbye to his life forever. At any moment he could be caught and executed, but that was already his problem, and the heroes didn't care about it at all. Dusk had already fallen over the empire, but local residents were still leisurely strolling between the shopping arcades. The brother and sister walked along the pavement, and Emily was sure she had never been there before. For some reason, she felt that the road was familiar to her, and she wondered if her brother had really been here, since he was moving forward so confidently. He said he had been here several times with Isaac, and therefore remembered the route very well. He held his sister's hand carefully and felt that now was the very moment when they needed to talk a little about secrets. Edmund knew his sister had a lot to hide, and throughout her life she had revealed little about herself. Emily had always been a person who didn't open up easily, and perhaps it was a stupid confession, but it seemed to him that there was nothing in the estate that he didn't know about. This was his huge mistake. At least when something difficult happens, family should be the one you can rely on. If Emily didn't tell, they would never know anything, just as they never knew before, but now that her secret was out, she no longer had to hide. Edmund decided to talk to his sister frankly, and if she really wanted to tell him something, she could tell him everything calmly. The sister smiled tenderly and promised that she would definitely tell her everything when she wanted. It seemed that now she did not quite understand the correct interpretation of her brother's words, and he was talking about something a little different. She apologized for hiding her magical abilities all this time, and perhaps that was exactly what he wanted to talk about now. It was as if the gentleman was in some confusion and expected to hear a slightly different answer from his sister. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted because right in front of Emily's feet, one of the merchants dropped baskets of apples, and the fruit flew in all directions. As it turned out, his horse had become very nervous for some reason, and the owner was simply trying to calm it down. He rushed to pick up the apples from the ground and asked forgiveness from the lady, who almost tripped over the fallen box. The lady asked if everything was okay with her brother, because just now he had almost been hit by the boxes that had scattered across the pavement. Suddenly, instead of her brother, who had just been next to her, she saw an empty space and looked around with excitement. She seemed to be left completely alone, in awkward silence, but her brother was indeed nowhere to be seen. He vanished without a trace, and Emily couldn't understand why these zombies couldn't just stand still. A stranger approached her, asking if the young lady was really lost and standing completely alone at such a dark time of day. Behind her stood a hooded young man with emerald-colored hair, but she didn't exactly know this man. Suspicious. Anyone would say this man is suspicious, but with so many eyes around, he clearly shouldn't have robbed her. Emily said she just got separated from her group and that's why she got into trouble, and she decided to find out why he was talking to her. The young man approached her quite confidently, as if they already knew each other, and stated that he was simply curious about something. His eyes glowed blue, and the stranger said strange words about how the girl managed to do this, since they were all dead then. Fear and panic gripped the heroine. At that moment she realized that they were talking about her brothers and sister, whom she had revived. No one could have known that something like this had happened there, and Emily was there completely alone that day. The stranger vanished without a trace the next second, and Emily, with eyes full of fear and horror, still stood in place, like a stone statue. While she was unable to move, her brother approached her and called her name, but even to his words the girl did not react in any way. He had to tug at her cloak to finally wake her up, while Emily seemed to be in a completely different space. Her brother searched for her and asked where she had been all this time, but Emily said that he had disappeared and that she had been standing here all this time. She looked into the distance where the stranger with blue eyes had just stood and had absolutely no idea what had just happened. That's why he saw her excitement, as if his sister had seen a living dead person, or someone had definitely scared her. She asked if her brother had seen the man who had just been standing there. She had talked to him, but Edmund had only seen people passing by. The boy asked if something had happened in just a minute, but Emily was indeed saying something strange. The lady was very confused, and all she could do was say that nothing had happened because she herself could not answer this question. Once home, she first turned to Demon, asking if he was sure that no one was around during the accident. That day, Leo checked everything himself. It was really empty, and did the lady really doubt the great demon? It was all too strange. The man she met today spoke as if he had seen that tragedy, and what he said was disturbing. The demon couldn't understand what had happened, and everything had been fine up until that moment, but now Emily looked incredibly worried. She told me that today she met a strange man during an outing. It turned out that he knew her, and about the tragic incident with the carriage. I wonder if he could be sure because he felt the presence of death at the scene, but that is hardly possible. The demon confirmed that only skilled dark magicians or clerics could do this, and they could indeed see the past. Perhaps the Holy See harbored a grudge against the ducal family. It was quite typical of them, and it seems they have not changed at all over time. Emily knew that dark mages had a natural aversion to holy power, and she couldn't help but notice the cleric. But the demon stated that there are those who have been able to learn to hide their power, and these people really do have strong abilities. Emily probably doesn't even realize yet that she's also good at hiding her demonic energy, and there's a lot she doesn't know about herself. The girl's energy was probably diluted in such a way as to hide for the sake of survival, and even a high-ranking cleric standing in front of her would not be able to determine who she was. The demon was certain that this was the reason she could not use the powerful demonic energy that was hidden within her. He was constantly muttering something, and the lady jokingly called him a grumbler who, like an old man, was saying something under his breath. Isaac already knew about a merchant named Donald. His name sounded stupid, but he might be quite a good specialist. And this became clear only because literally the next morning, 4 coffins with corpses stood in the living room of the Duke's house. Everything was fully prepared. Emily and her brother managed to complete an important task and remain unnoticed. Julia was the most worried of all, realizing that if they were caught doing this, they would all be executed on the spot. Perhaps it wasn't just them, Isaac realized. Their entire family, all the people connected to them, could also be destroyed. The sister did not understand how he could say something like that so carelessly, as if he was not worried about their future. Emily asked everyone not to go near the office and closed the door, and having written a special zombie recipe, it seems she did all she could. All it took was a fresh corpse, the blood of a dark mage, a weak zombie, and the sister was ready to begin. Isaac's case was the most urgent, so the sister decided to try it on him, and the brother was already ready. The ritual was complex, dangerous, and the slightest mistake could cost her her life, or, worse, turn Isaac into an uncontrollable monster. She cut her palm as she stood in front of the corpse, and the blood flew up in a purple stream, weaving into a bizarre pattern over his dead body. Emily concentrated, directing a stream of magic into the very core of his being. The symbols etched into the floor around the coffin glowed with a ghostly purple light, casting long, distorted shadows across the stone floors. She whispered ancient spells, words full of power and darkness that echoed throughout the ducal house. Isaac, who had been standing motionless like a statue, began to tremble, his eyes widening, reflecting the dancing flames of the torches and the ominous glow. The energy emanating from the corpse in the coffin grew stronger, pulling at the threads between the dead and the living. Emily, with her eyes closed, controlled her dark magic. In the center of this chaos stood Emily, like the epicenter of the storm. Books and papers began to fly around, disturbed by a whirlwind of invisible force. Heavy books on necromancy, which had been gathering dust on the shelves for centuries, now whirled in a mad dance, like living creatures rebelling against their imprisonment. In this storm of dark magic, the sister asked if everything was okay with her brother. She needed to control every little thing. From her fingertips, like the muzzles of invisible cannons, threads of dark energy burst forth, weaving a complex pattern around Isaac. At that moment, Emily felt incredible power, but at the same time some kind of danger. Her brother stood motionless, and when the dark magical vortex calmed down, Emily tried to figure out if everything was okay with him. Suddenly the brother uttered quiet words. He felt something strange that he had not felt for a long time. Isaac felt stronger than before, but now there was one small nuance. He felt incredibly thirsty and immediately asked for a drink. According to him, it was not just a human thirst, it was as if something sinister. Emily noticed his wrist, and indeed the scar seemed to be gone, and Isaac confirmed that his hand was much better. As long as he didn't engage in direct combat, everything would be quite fine, and his arm was actually functioning well now. Turning to Edmund, the sister asked if he really wanted to try it too, because he kept looking at her so intently. But the brother decided to first look at Isaac's progress, since none of them knew how the improvement would go. All that remained was to figure out what to do with the other bodies, since there were still 4 more coffins lying in front of them. Therefore, he suggested moving the coffins to the basement, and Isaac and Julia were surprised that there really was a basement in the Duke's house. It was originally made as a safe place in case of a dangerous situation, but it seems no one except Edmund knew about it. He said it was always cold there and it was just the perfect place to store bodies so they wouldn't spoil. He touched the concrete candlestick, turned it a few times, and the heroes were surprised an entrance to the basement actually appeared in front of them. And only Edmund knew the secret of the old ducal mansion. The entrance to the basement was simply enormous. Perhaps it hid the secrets of the old house, and it was no coincidence that no one from the family knew about it. The smell of dampness, rot, and something else, inexplicably eerie, like the breath of darkness itself, hit my nose. Isaac couldn't believe how there had been a secret passage in their house all this time, and only one person knew about it. He deftly lifted the coffin onto his shoulder and offered to leave this task to him, and it still turned out to him that such things only happen in fairy tales. There was a book on the floor, and unfortunately Isaac didn't notice how he tripped over it. He dropped the coffin, from which a corpse flew right into the center of the room. Julia screamed at what her brother was doing, and it all seemed like sheer madness, something you could only see in horror movies. The brother apologized, admitting that he would clean everything up himself, but at that moment, Emily noticed something strange. She asked him to wait and frowned, turning her attention to the neck of one of the corpses. There was a mark of some sort on the back of his head, and she was certain she had seen it before just recently. Just a couple of days ago, Tristan and the knight managed to deal with the attackers, and the crown prince told about the holy mark on the back of his head, and how after death the mark almost completely disappeared, so that it was impossible to deliver the bodies to court. At that moment, the heroine realized what Donald had done, and these were definitely the same people she had seen recently. They called Donald through the magic ball, who assured them that the corpses were of the highest quality, and it was incredibly difficult for him to obtain them. He knew a herbalist who often went into the forbidden area of the Ludun mountain range, and he said that these bodies were buried in the middle of those mountains. It turns out that they received the body of the killer of His Highness the Crown Prince, and the Imperial Corpse Disposal Department must have come up empty-handed, and the report had already been sent. So they had plenty of time to narrow down their suspects, which meant they had a big problem. Yulia was afraid that they might be exposed, but it was too early to come to that conclusion. Emily would probably be at the top of that list, but they didn't have any hard evidence to prove her guilt. Edmund suggested that perhaps they would try to see her reaction first, and would definitely call her for a talk soon. He was worried whether his sister would be able to cope with this task, and whether she would be able to behave as usual. Emily asked her brother not to worry, and was completely confident in her abilities, as this was not the first time she had experienced such a birth. Being able to get out of any situation through persuasion was her specialty, and in this, she felt her strength. The next day, Emily went to work, and her coworker asked her what she did over the weekend. The lady said she spent a little time with her family, but Jamie's relationship with his family was not going well at all, so she spent time alone. More importantly, Jamie asked if she had heard the rumor that was already circulating throughout the Empire. They say the Vatican will soon send someone here. It seems it's someone high-ranking. Everyone has already created a mess preparing for the reception. From what she had heard, it would be significant. Judging by the situation, a person of the level of a cardinal would come, and Emily wondered what could have been the reason for the Vatican to want to visit the imperial palace. Who knew how they could understand what these refined aristocrats were thinking, and it remained a mystery. The crown prince entered the office, and the ladies greeted Tristan with respect. Tristan accepted their greeting, making a gesture to let the girls know that such formalities were enough. His face was puzzled, and Emily wondered if the Vatican was interested in extending territorial contracts. Or perhaps it is connected with the assassination attempt on Tristan, which happened quite recently and which many already know about. Emily looked at Werner and Tristan, and it was unlikely that they would even guess that the bodies could be taken by a person from the black market. The knight suddenly placed a huge pile of papers on Emily's desk. She had never seen such a huge folder in all her time at work. She looked at Werner, puzzled. I don't understand why this work can't be divided between two secretaries. His Highness said that it was necessary to review some documents, but there were too many of them. The most interesting thing is that the first document had a small note attached to it that said that someone was hiding a zombie. At lunch, Emily, Tristan, and Werner sat silently for some reason today, and a strange tension hung in the air. The knight decided to ask Emily if she liked the food, as if he was trying to find out something from her. After taking a bite of the cake, the girl admitted that the dinner was truly incredible, and she liked everything. She decided to ask why they had decided to invite her to lunch separately today, although they could have just as easily invited Jamie along. Tristan put his fork down on the table and said, "The bodies suddenly disappeared, as if they had never been there." Early this morning, the disposal department was dispatched to the Ludun mountain range, but they reported that there was no sign of the bodies anywhere, and it was possible that the Vatican had taken them. Be that as it may, the traces of the marks would soon disappear from the corpses. The bodies were not so important to the Vatican that they would risk starting a conflict for this. Therefore, Tristan was sure that only 3 of them knew the exact place where these unfortunate corpses lay. It was for this reason that Emily was allowed to have lunch alone, so Tristan decided to ask her directly. Did she manage to tell anyone about what happened that day? And if she did, then it would be best for her to tell the truth. After his words, the lady threw herself on the floor. She asked forgiveness for her insolence, assuring that she knew nothing, and certainly could not say anything about it. But there was nothing simple in this world. The knight began to worry about the girl. He asked her to get up, assuring her that they did not want to interrogate her, but asked only to make sure. Of course, they didn't want to interrogate her. It sounded very convincing coming from the one conducting the interrogation, but Tristan called her because he suspects and wants to catch her like a rat. Emily wanted to prove her innocence and swore that she knew nothing, but she couldn't figure out how to do it. It turned out that Tristan didn't even believe in her oath. He continued to stare at her while she sat on the floor and continued to swear. Werner tried to calm the girl down. He even gave her a handkerchief and realized that it was too unexpected for her. The lady played her part beautifully, insisting she was perfectly fine, but in reality she was just scared. Tristan suggested that perhaps the Vatican had indeed taken the bodies, and she had probably just managed to avoid a crisis. Emily promised to return the knight's handkerchief along with the one he had given her earlier. She admitted that she felt ill, but continued to be faithful to her master. The knight always called Emily his lady, and they had an incredibly warm and pleasant relationship. She smiled sweetly at him, gently repeating that she had no intention of insisting on it at all, but since he had begun to suspect her, she needed to prepare properly. After work, the heroine took up embroidery to somehow calm herself down after what had happened. Her assistant Riley noticed that something was definitely bothering the lady, and that something had probably happened. The lady only wanted to help, because it was her duty to closely monitor the condition of her mistress. Whenever something was bothering her, Emily always started embroidering in silence, and that's why she decided to ask this question. Lately, Emily and the young master had been talking alone a lot and throwing her out, so Riley thought something was wrong. Emily tried not to show it, but it seemed that everyone close to her understood perfectly well the state she was in. Riley warned that if she needed help, the lady could always turn to her, and she would help her in any situation. The young lady preferred to bear her heavy burden alone and never asked anyone for help, even when it was absolutely necessary. Riley remembered she came to give something, but when she saw the lady, her thoughts became confused. A letter arrived recently. It says that Lady Hazel is returning to the ducal mansion tomorrow, and she will arrive very soon. This meant that it seemed she had completed her obligatory service in the Vatican and would soon be coming home. And this news further darkens all plans, because the zombie relatives needed to be hidden somewhere. Hazel Bissett was Emily's classmate at the academy and an old friend whom they had not seen for a long time. She was a paladin of the Vatican. This girl managed to achieve great heights during her service, but there was one small problem. The meaning of her existence is only one thing: she is simply obliged to destroy dark magicians, such as Emily. When Hazel fluttered out of the carriage like a ray of sunshine, brightening the gray autumn day with her presence, Emily felt a weight lifted from her heart. Their friendship stood the test of time and distance, and this was a very valuable factor. My friend's hugs were warm and sincere, like the good old days, and were not overshadowed by recent events. Hazel asked when she left if no one had tried to get her friend into trouble, as had happened constantly during training. During her absence, Emily was helped by another girl named Natalie, so nothing terrible happened and she did not have to worry. By the way, Emily asked if Hazel had contacted Natalie, but unfortunately she had something else more important to do. In Hazel's opinion, this girl had always been selfish, so it didn't matter at all, and in fact, she didn't even hope to meet her. Emily asked her friend not to be upset, and she was sure that they would definitely have a fun time together. For her arrival, she prepared delicious aromatic tea, sweet treats, and Hazel asked how her brothers and sister were doing, but Emily had to lie. They were busy, as always. A friend asked if the location for her new assignment, which she was supposed to go on soon, had already been determined. Hazel might have to go to Frostwood Forest. They were informed that terrible monsters began to appear there. Emily was worried. It was okay that her friend was telling her this information, and it was probably strictly confidential. But Hazel had complete confidence in her and said that she was not afraid to tell anything and that she trusted her completely. The conversations flowed easily and naturally, as if Emily had no secrets to keep. She was incredibly glad that her friend still trusted her, but still, after so many years of separation, she felt some kind of heaviness. When Emily saw her, her heart seemed to start beating faster, and for good reason, because Emily was a real dark magician. At this time, the brothers and sister were on the second floor, and now for the first time they felt what it was like to feel real divine power. Isaac's hands were simply shaking. He felt anger and an unquenchable thirst, and it was as if he had no control over himself at all. It was no surprise. Zombies couldn't stand divine power, and right on the first floor sat a paladin. Isaac had never encountered paladins or priests before, so he didn't know, but this turned out to be a real test. Julia lay there with her face buried in the floor, not understanding why Emily had invited this girl into a house where a bunch of zombies were sitting. Julia didn't expect things to turn out exactly like this, and she herself said that if they suddenly suggested meeting somewhere else, it could arouse suspicion. Edmund asked his sister to be patient a little longer, and if they went out by accident, they would definitely bump into someone, and then it could become a disaster. Perhaps they, along with Julia, would have to improve their bodies, and this was logical, because at least Isaac looked normal compared to them. As soon as they said these words, they turned their attention to their brother, who now did not look like himself at all. Edmund and Julia were seriously frightened, and with eyes full of horror they looked at their brother, who slowly began to turn into a strange creature. Reason seemed to leave him, leaving only instincts and thirst. He was turning into something monstrous, a reflection of darkness. The darkness swirling around his body grew thicker, enveloping him. He tried to resist, his hands moving chaotically. Isaac's eyes glowed red, reflecting the dance of the demonic flame in the depths of his once kind soul. It seemed like the brother had just realized that Isaac was really doing something terrible, and in just a few minutes he looked like a real zombie. Strange sounds were coming from the second floor. Emily couldn't help but pay attention to it. She knows perfectly well what's going on there now. But she was not the only one who heard strange sounds, and Hazel immediately asked if there was anyone else at home, although she just said that all the brothers are at work now, and there should definitely be no one at home. She didn't mention her sister and said that she was currently on vacation, and that she was probably conducting some kind of alchemical experiments in her room. Emily prayed for the sounds on the second floor to die down, because it was unlikely that the truth would be hidden from Hazel. Finally, the next second it became more or less quiet, and Emily was still trying not to give in to panic. Looking out the window, she saw her brother Isaac's deathly pale hand, which for some reason was scratching right on the glass. The heroine stared at the window with her mouth open, while drops of tea ran down her chin and her eyes widened to incredible sizes. Hazel asked what happened and why her friend looked so strange. Emily admitted she just thought it would be nice if Julia showed more restraint when there were guests here, and perhaps she would need to be scolded. Her friend had expressed her opinion. It was a good idea, and Emily had always been too soft on her sister. Hazel admitted that when she first discovered her powers and started acting arrogant in front of her sister, she considered it inappropriate behavior. The next second she fell silent because she realized that she had probably said something unnecessary. Emily decided to ignore this information, and now one thing was important, that she under no circumstances turn around and look at the window. Her friend decided to go for a walk, admitting that it was a bit stuffy here, but Hazel decided to just open the window in that case. Emily screamed loudly, "You can't do this!" She abruptly grabbed her friend's hands, and it was urgent to change the topic of conversation. There was a garden next to the Duke's house, so she admitted that if they opened the window, bees might fly in and sting them. To avoid problems, the lady suggested going to her room and having a good time there. She had to convince her friend that she would like to spend time with her in the room, like in the good old days, and indulge in nostalgia. She was rather trying to lead her away from the other rooms until Hazel understood where her friend was rushing to in such a desperate hurry. The next second, they again heard strange creaking sounds, noises that were definitely coming from one of the rooms. Hazel began to doubt. Her friend said that there was no one at home except her and Julia, but Julia's room was in a different place. She had to lie again, that's true, and she couldn't think of anything other than to say that Julia probably just dropped a big book or something like that. The friend was sure, she definitely heard something break, and assumed that perhaps someone had broken into the house, but Emily understood that things were too bad. They headed up the stairs to the second floor to check if everything was okay there, and it was necessary to make sure of that. Emily could no longer hold her back, and Hazel asked her to stay behind, as it could be too dangerous for her. She was still trying to tell her that she shouldn't go there, and she couldn't tell her some information. Hazel kicked the door with all her might, but what she saw left her in incredible shock. Emily admitted that it was a lie that Julia was involved in alchemy, and she was very sorry that she had deceived her, but the truth was different. She was almost sure that now Hazel would find out the whole truth, would find out that the brothers had become zombies, but they saw a strange picture. Isaac buried his face in his brother's shoulder, and Edmund looked at the uninvited guests in surprise. Of course, Hazel had no choice but to think everything was wrong, and she immediately slammed the door in her face. She asked if Isaac and Edmund really had such a close relationship and why her friend had kept it a secret all this time. Emily was genuinely grateful for this misunderstanding, and she couldn't let her guard down and laugh, and decided to think about something sad. Hazel was too shocked. She had been in this house many times as a child, but she never noticed that something like this was happening between them. Emily understood that everything seemed too suspicious to her and admitted that this was precisely the reason she couldn't say anything. In order to somehow smooth over the situation, he therefore opened the door slightly and asked if something had happened. There were red scratches on his neck, which he made no attempt to hide, in order to make the situation even more ridiculous. Hazel didn't know where to hide from embarrassment because she had just caught her brothers by surprise, where they were tenderly hugging each other. After slamming the door, Edmund declared that everything was perfectly fine and warned his friend Emily to be careful next time. Soon Hazel left, and all this time Isaac sat on a chair, and Edmund had to tie him up with a strong rope. Now Emily needed to figure out what had happened here and why Isaac was suddenly tied up. Julia said that no one knew what had happened. He just changed in an instant. He intended to go down, and he probably wanted to get to Hazel. Probably the brother sensed the sacred paladin, and that was the reason he wanted to get to her to kill her. Emily gently touched Edmund's face with her hand, and he was incredibly happy to feel her touch. Julia didn't understand why he felt so good, because zombies don't actually feel anything. At that moment, Demon, also known as the Black Cat, entered the room and declared that it was natural for the surname Oru to always obey its master. It is also simply necessary to protect the owner from the paladin and from other forces that can harm the dark magician. Emily was worried about Demon. It was too dangerous here, but he still got in here and asked not to change the subject. The lady guessed that the reason was definitely divine power, and since she used dark magic on Isaac once again, he reacted intensely. Because they had now become zombies, they reacted negatively to divine power and could even lose their minds. This was indeed the case, and if Emily had remained Hazel, it was unlikely that her brother would have been able to completely lose his mind. She tried to hide the fact that the familiar was trying to protect its master. Hazel had to go somewhere else soon, so they wouldn't see her for a while. Leo asked if the lady had not yet managed to get rid of her bad habit, which he had already told her about more than once. The demon felt incredibly sorry that his words did not reach the zombie's mind, and that the brother and sister would not be able to understand at all that she was a shameless liar. Emily's life has already been full of lies, so this won't change anything, and perhaps Demon knows this better than anyone, but he still gets angry every day. Emily assured Isaac that he would calm down after some time, and that they should forget about this unpleasant incident. Stretching, Julia decided to do as her sister said, and finally she felt more or less comfortable. She saw it all with her own eyes, but if Hazel hadn't misunderstood, they would have been in serious trouble. Julia laughed loudly throughout the room. It was incredibly funny, and what was the point of discussing this situation now, saying that it was a simple misunderstanding? Edmund didn't find it funny at all. Now she was sure that she had caught them hugging their own brother. Everyone had almost calmed down, but suddenly a child's voice was heard from below, and it was definitely little Andrea. He had probably already returned from his classes, and Emily understood that it was necessary to hide Isaac somewhere as quickly as possible. They had already heard approaching footsteps. Edmund had no choice but to put his tied brother to bed and cover him with a blanket, as if he were sleeping. The little boy opened the doors and saw his beloved family with joyful eyes, wanting to tell them about his first day at the academy. Emily asked how the first day of school went, and everyone really wanted the boy to do well. Today, for some reason, Andrea was taciturn. He was just lost in thought and couldn't find the right words to describe his emotions. He said dryly, everything was fine, and there was probably something he didn't want to talk about. Instead of discussing the first day of school, the boy decided to go to his room, warning that he was going to rest. It was amazing, the younger brother, who bragged about the academy every day, spent his first day there and didn't say anything, but immediately went to his room. The brothers and sisters realized that perhaps the first day at the academy had gone wrong and left an indelible mark on the boy's soul. In Emily's arms, Demon continued to be indignant, not understanding how anyone could be upset by their brother's words, and they just loved to fuss. They began to discuss as a family what had happened on the first day of school, and perhaps Andrea had quarreled with his friend. Julia knew that the boy was one of those people who were even afraid to catch a cold so as not to be a burden to their friends, and if he had a fight, then there was a reason. It is quite possible that he fell in love with someone. Maybe he was rejected, but a broken heart is something the young gentleman certainly would not want to discuss. Edmund was almost sure that this could be a quarrel with a friend or first love. He told the sisters not to worry, saying he had the perfect solution and had managed to get an official letter from the academy. It was an invitation to Parents' Day, where you can find out the whole truth and also meet the boy's friends. An annual event at the beginning of the school year, it is designed to ease parental anxiety and help first-year students adapt to school life. The event was scheduled to take place next week. There wasn't much time left, and this invitation was sent to the whole family. Isaac is unlikely to be able to tear himself away from his work due to the orders of His Highness the Crown Prince, and he is not even in a condition to talk. Emily's job as a secretary wasn't difficult, so she was confident that one day off wouldn't be a problem. Yulia suggested that they all go together and make sure that everything was in order with his friends and his personal life, but it was as if they had forgotten a little that 3 of them had become real zombies, even though this hike could be fun. The next day, Emily approached Crown Prince Tristan, informing him that the school event was scheduled to take place the following Wednesday. She was only going to take 1 day off and asked if that would be too much of a hassle. Tristan thought for a moment, and for some reason he couldn't immediately agree to 1 day off. The answer Emily least expected to hear was Tristan offering to go with her and asking if it was possible. The lady smiled and asked the Crown Prince why he needed to go to Parents' Day. The young man said he needed to check something and would be happy to go to the parent-teacher meeting with Emily. Unfortunately, she would hardly be able to refuse the Crown Prince such a request, since this was the only way he would give her a day off. Tristan stated that he wanted Emily to be there with him, and she couldn't believe he was telling her that. And the only option was that they found traces of dark magic in the academy where her younger brother studied. The academy was the largest in the entire empire. The children of many aristocrats studied here. Many families arrived for Parents' Day, and everyone wanted to see with their own eyes what things were like at the academy. And Emily didn't even imagine that she would have to attend the parent-teacher meeting with the Crown Prince, and not with her family. Everyone noticed that today is Parents' Day, but for some reason His Highness the Crown Prince appeared here with some companion. There was a young lady walking beside him, and many immediately recognized her as being from the Duke's House of Walker, but no one could understand why they were together. Tristan wondered if Duke Walker would not be with them, which was rather odd. Emily confessed, and they decided that it would be better to come alone, and she was afraid that they might become a hindrance to His Highness. It was considerate of her, and the heroine was sure that they would now go to the place where traces of dark magic were discovered, but for some reason Tristan was in no hurry with this question. Tristan stated that they came to see her little brother, because today is a special Parents' Day. Therefore, the first thing they need to do is head there so that the boy does not feel alone in any way. He understood how important it was for Andrea to be with her family on such an occasion, and Werner confirmed that Tristan is surprisingly a rather considerate crown prince who respects other people. Perhaps it was called attention, but unfortunately Emily could not understand this man in any way and had no idea what to expect from him. The parents gathered in the classroom, where all the children were already ready for the parent-teacher meeting. Little Andrea was sitting in the front row at the very edge, and he was very happy when he saw his beloved little sister. His eyes of different colors shone with admiration, especially since this time she arrived on time. Despite the presence of the Crown Prince, Emily still came here to support her brother Andrea and waved her hand to him. Even though an uninvited guest had joined them, she could not forget her original goal. Andrea seemed to have no problem making friends, and next to him sat a girl with red hair, and it was probably Yuri, the second daughter of the Archmanet ducal house. They were sitting next to each other, and perhaps it was she he fell in love with, but Tristan unexpectedly asked the girl a question. Does she feel something strange when she is in this class, and maybe she has something to say? In fact, Emily wanted it to be impossible to find traces of dark magic in a place like this, and there definitely shouldn't be any here. Unfortunately, she herself was a source of dark energy, so it was no surprise that dark magic was everywhere here. She remained silent, and Tristan realized that it was true, and dark magic was present here, but it remained to be seen in which direction. The lady admitted that she had a strange feeling, as if the dark magic was somewhere very far away, or as if it was located somewhere below, underground. She tried to confuse Tristan and the knight, assuring him that there was magic underground and that digging could lead to a collapse, and only suggested that in that case they hold off for now, trying to figure out what to do next. Something was wrong at the academy. Emily felt strong dark magic, and Werner immediately realized that it was serious. Emily was not like herself, she answered clearly. The dark force is moving right underground, and it is moving constantly. Tristan thought the dark magic might be slipping away, but Emily thought it was quite the opposite. She looked at the prince with frightened eyes. The dark magic was approaching them directly. The lady ran towards her little brother. The danger was very close. Werner and Tristan didn't understand what had happened, or why Emily had rushed headlong to save the boy. Dark magic was approaching underground, under the academy. The earth was shaking, foreshadowing the inevitable. Andrea, her little brother, no one suspected the impending danger. The walls of the academy pulsed with some invisible energy. The ground shook underfoot, sending dust and debris from the ceiling. Emily, without thinking, threw herself at her brother, covering him with her whole body, her arms wrapped around his head, trying to protect him from the impending disaster. The parent-teacher meeting turned into complete chaos. Drops of blood appeared on Emily's cheek. The academy was plunging into chaos. Screams, debris, dust, everything mixed into one nightmare. The main thing was Andrea. She checked if he was okay, feeling his fragile body. He was scared, but not injured, and that was the main thing. With tears in his eyes, Andrea was worried about the state of Julia and his beloved brother now, and they were definitely not there. Emily asked her little brother to stay here, promising that she had to check the situation and would return soon. She asked Andrea to be quiet and hide somewhere under a desk. The ground beneath the academy continued to shake. As if in its death throes, the ominous rumble did not subside, but only grew louder. A huge black silhouette of a wolf appeared in front of Emily. The dark magic that had burst out from underground took on a visible form. The demon bared his teeth, revealing fangs as sharp as razors, and his roar, low and guttural, filled the entire space. One of the parents saw a huge, scary monster, and the hall, which had recently been calm and quiet, was filled with human screams. His eyes burned with hellish fire, piercing even the thickest darkness. His fur seemed to absorb the light, making his figure even more terrifying. She couldn't afford to waver now. She had to protect him, all the people, at any cost. Little Yuri with red hair even began to hiccup from fear, looking at the fragments and the destroyed ceremonial hall. The girl was crying, huddled in a corner, and this was not surprising, because it's not every day that you meet a terrible, huge monster that appeared from the depths of the earth. He was like thunder born in the depths of the earth, a primal rage that knew neither pity nor mercy was felt. It was unlikely that such a creature would be able to frighten a dark magician as strong as Emily, and now she first of all needed to deal with him. For a moment his gaze lingered on Emily, as if assessing her, and then the demon bared his teeth and ran straight towards her, wanting to tear her to pieces. She covered the little girl with her body, because the monster rushed straight at her, and the girl, closing her eyes, only cried loudly and trembled all over. It was necessary to urgently hide it somewhere while the monster stopped for a while, but for some reason he was in no hurry to approach them. At that moment, Emily heard Andrea's voice, who was just hiding behind the desks. She needed to save the girl. Yurine could stop her tears. She was paralyzed by real horror and fear, but fortunately, she was completely fine. Emily asked the children to hide well. Andrea was surprised that his sister was really going to leave them and go straight to the monster. Smiling, the sister asked me to close my eyes and count to 100, and by that time she promised to deal with the monsters and return back. She remembered all the lessons, all the spells, and only dark magic could help. Emily concentrated, gathering all her will into a single beam of energy. Now it was important to win at least a little time. Her hands slowly rose, drawing in the air symbols that she vaguely remembered from old books. She spoke the words in a firm voice, and the magic, obeying her will, began to weave around, forming a thin network designed to tame this hellish beast. Emily decided to become bait to lure the evil monster away, and only her dark power could save everyone. She attacked the monster with dark magic, and suddenly he stopped. The magical streams directed at him seemed to get stuck in the impenetrable darkness enveloping his body. It was unclear what to expect next, but Emily took a second to assess the situation. The demon froze. Something struck him. It was definitely not magic, and his fiery eyes suddenly stared straight at her. The monster came close, sniffed her head, and Emily felt something strange, not fear, but an inexplicable sense of connection with the monster. What was it? Recognition? But it was impossible. The evil monster suddenly licked her head like the most faithful dog, and his growling immediately died down. The monster took a step back. He no longer seemed threatening, and his movements became uncertain, even somewhat timid. At that moment, Tristan suddenly appeared, holding a special sword in his hands, and shouted loudly, "Enough!" Emily immediately noticed the sword, and it was the sword of Samuel, wielded by the Crown Prince, created to defeat evil. The legend said that the paladin Samuel destroyed the dark magician in a sacred campaign, and this was the very world that contained divine power. Now Emily understood how the prince managed to kill the monsters with just one blow, and it was only thanks to the magic sword. There was still one living monster left, which continued to growl ferociously, and Tristan was already ready to kill it. The monster realized that he was in great danger and turned around to run away from Tristan, who swung at him. At this time, Julia and Edmund just returned. The lady screamed in horror, asking what was going on here, because they had only stepped away for a minute to buy gifts. Tristan shouted loudly for Duke Walker to be extremely careful, because monsters had appeared in the academy building. Having noticed a new victim, the terrible monster rushed towards Julia and her brother. They certainly did not imagine that they would encounter such horror here. The gifts flew out of Julia's hands. Her brother covered the girl with his body so that she would not be harmed by the terrible, hellish, roaring beast. They sank to the floor in fear and watched with frightened eyes as Julia hiccuped quietly, and gifts for baby Andrea were scattered around. But Emily didn't seem to notice the monster, and it seemed she was beginning to understand what was going on here. The bloodthirsty monster recognized the lady as one of its own, because dark magic also boiled in her veins. So he licked her like a dog and acted strangely when he approached Emily and did not touch her. With one swing of his sword, Tristan dealt with the second monster and asked his assistant Werner to clean up the mess so as not to frighten the children and their parents. Finally, the threat was over, and the children returned to class with their parents, seeing debris all around them and a huge crack right in the center of the room. Andrea was still hiding under the desk. He saw everything with his own eyes, and the boy was very scared, as was his friend. When it was all over, he rushed to hug Emily, confessing that from now on, he would listen carefully to his brothers and sisters. He promised not to sneak into the kitchen at night to steal candy, return the jewelry, and asked for forgiveness for secretly giving meat to Lev without his sister's knowledge. Andrea loved to cause trouble, but luckily she was perfectly fine. Everyone was alive, and none of the children or their parents were hurt. Looking at his sister in shock, his sister was also standing in the hall, for whom Andrea was also incredibly worried. Julia asked what happened. It was strange to see monsters in the middle of the classroom, and monsters can appear in lands under the control of a dark mage. The academy is definitely located near the capital, and no one has been able to pass through this barrier before. So it was all very suspicious, monsters at a parent-teacher meeting that terrified little children and adults. The Crown Prince approached the ducal family and asked them to drop their familiarity when some wanted to greet him. As everyone has already realized, this was not just an accident, and it looks like someone deliberately sent monsters here right during a parent-teacher meeting. Edmund couldn't believe it. Who could do such a thing? But Tristan was never wrong in his opinion. The prince assumed that this incident was directed at the Duke of Walker's house, and now he was completely sure of it. Edmund and his sisters held their breath, not understanding why the reason lay in their family. Tristan noticed that they didn't look surprised, and was that what they thought when they saw the bloodthirsty creatures from the dungeon? So he admitted that although their family was humble, they had maintained a place as one of the main pillars of the empire, and it was not surprising that someone would oppose them from time to time. It might be a matter of political manipulation, but it might also be a matter of another reason that no one could even guess about now. Edmund wondered what Tristana meant by these words, because it was all too strange. Tristan turned to the knight Werner and asked him to show the Duke what he had prepared especially for them. Werner took out photographs from his pocket, which clearly revealed the reasons for the assassination attempt on the ducal family. Horror appeared in Edmund's eyes, as if he immediately understood everything in that second, as soon as he caught a glimpse of these photos. The first photo was of Countess Cecilia from the kingdom of Tahil, and the second was of a margrave named Lucia from another kingdom of Shuhil. Finally, in the last photograph, he saw the Frostwood Forest Keeper, and judging by the images, a logical conclusion could be drawn. All these people are descendants of the 13 prophets who led humanity to victory in the holy battle, and now they have all disappeared without a trace. Edmund asked the Crown Prince if he really meant to say that all these people had died, and indeed, terrible tragedies had occurred last year. Assuming that an unknown group was targeting the descendants of the prophets, the prince and his aides were currently investigating. He also noted that Lady Walker is assisting in the investigation, so that they can catch the person behind all this. The prince noted that the information was classified, so they could not officially announce it or protect Walker's home, because if they did, the enemies might escape. Unfortunately, they were going to use them as bait to draw out the enemy, and Emily had no idea where that would lead. Tristan admitted that it might be difficult to mobilize the Imperial Knights, but promised to deal with any problems that might arise. And he was ready to personally protect the Duke's House of Walker, promising to take all measures to ensure that none of the brothers and sisters would be harmed in any way. And this meant only one thing: the Crown Prince had just admitted that he was going to move in with them to protect their lives. Edmund was sure it was too dangerous, and they were also worried about the precious imperial blood, and perhaps he should think again. The ducal family didn't know when their secret would be discovered, and there were corpses in coffins in the basement, but Tristan wasn't the kind of person who could sleep peacefully when people were in danger. Since it was an unofficial visit, he asked not to prepare anything, but simply to provide a free room. Wishing Edmund good luck, the Duke promised to see him soon, and he was completely confident in his decision. Walker has no chance to avoid this, and they will actually have to live under the same roof with the prince, hiding their terrible secrets. This time they had hit the mark, and now all that was left was to come up with a good plan on how to proceed so that the Crown Prince wouldn't find out that they were zombies. Arriving home, Edmund suggested first talking about the monsters that had unexpectedly appeared at the academy. It had to happen at that exact moment when Isaac was not around, and perhaps it was even better that way, since his body was still unstable. Emily suggested that perhaps the monsters didn't attack Ed and Julia because they recognized them as their own. Julia was glad that fortunately no one was hurt, but everyone understood that sooner or later people would start to suspect something. There was one major problem left: the Crown Prince was going to stop at the estate because of this to personally check everything and ensure security. As an Imperial Knight, Isaac should probably know a little more about the Crown Prince and what his intentions are. Julia asked if there was any suggestion as to what he wanted to do, but in reality, Sag hadn't met Tristan that often. Moreover, this person rarely shows his feelings, and it is completely impossible to guess what he is up to. Perhaps his closest assistant Werner knows all his plans, and it is worth somehow finding out from him. Emily was the only person who was connected to Werner because she was also his personal secretary, and she will probably have to figure out on her own what they are up to in the future. As the Crown Prince said, there have been many deaths of descendants over the past year, and the carriage explosion they survived was carried out by the same group. The worst thing is that this time they attacked the younger brother, and as if the tragic incident with the carriage wasn't enough for them. Therefore, he understood that if all this really was an attack directed at the descendants of the prophets, then their goal was probably won. The obstacle to the transmission of blessings through generations was the only reason they wanted to kill them. It sounded like something only a dark mage could think of, but there was actually one dark mage in this room who was unlikely to have any connection to it. Everyone looked at Emily, who had dark, magical energy boiling in her veins. This question was serious. That's why he even called Isaac too ignorant towards his sister when he said those words. Emily didn't feel resentment towards her brother, but Edmund said he needed to be taught a lesson so that he would think about what he was saying. The Dark Mages were sealed on Thanatos Island for a long time, and the Vatican is tasked with monitoring them to this day, which means either the Dark Mage escaped, or the Vatican itself orchestrated the whole thing. It was becoming clear how the monsters were controlled, and something had definitely been missed here. If this is a dark magician, then he could independently tame monsters that worship their master, fulfilling his will. If it was the Vatican, they couldn't use divine power to gather and manipulate monsters and also force them to do what they wanted. In other words, neither side was treated well by the ducal family, so it is reasonable to expect the attacks to continue. Moreover, now the Crown Prince was going to stay in their house, and the ducal family had to do something. It was necessary to come up with a secret signal that the Crown Prince would never guess about, and this was the only way. Until Tristan returns to the palace, the siblings must remain vigilant to protect their family from the revelation of terrible secrets. The very next day, Mr. Tristan arrived at the mansion. He intended to stay there incognito, but his brothers and sisters greeted him warmly. Therefore, he admitted that they were grateful that the gentleman had come personally to deal with their difficulties and was willing to sacrifice his time for the sake of salvation. Everyone was quite worried after the recent incident, but Tristan heard that after that the academy was running smoothly as usual. Now they have officially assessed this as an attack by monsters, but everyone understood that there must clearly be someone behind this. The servants of the ducal house presented the prince with a bottle of expensive wine, and everyone knew perfectly well that this year the Vatican and the Empire were planning to conclude a new treaty. It is for this reason that the Ackman household remains silent for now. The butler politely poured a thin stream of expensive red wine. Edmund suggested that Tristan have an aperitif first before the hearty dinner that awaited him that day. It was a Schuylkill vermouth, vintage 33, and it was specially presented to show respect to the dear guest. This action could be translated as the head of the ducal family wanted to meet secretly in the evening, probably wanted to discuss something with Tristan. Holding a glass of aromatic drink in his hands, the prince began to think there was something else interesting to him in this story. One important point was haunting him, and after the monster attack he couldn't stop thinking about it. The question was whether the holy blessing was powerful enough to repel the bloodthirsty, hellish monsters. No one expected such a question, and Edmund opened his mouth in surprise, asking His Highness for forgiveness. Tristan probably suspected something, but he couldn't talk about it openly, and only tried to answer his suspicions with questions. So he asked him to repeat it. He coughed 3 times, and this was a signal to divert the attention of His Highness the Crown Prince. Julia decided to intervene to distract the gentleman. He shouted loudly. It seems she saw a suspicious, strange shadow outside the window. Even Andrea, at his young age, would not have fallen for such a stupid trick, and what else could one expect from Julia? Tristan merely noted that Lady Julia seemed to have a very keen eye, and even asked her to describe what she had seen, since, if you think about it, not much time had passed since the last attack. Secret ill-wishers were moving faster than he imagined, and Emily couldn't tell if it was a joke or just sarcasm. The gentleman was extremely serious, and obviously the next target of the attack was the Walker ducal family. He was absolutely serious. His Highness Tristan seemed not to understand the whole situation, and now he was concerned with other important issues. The master ordered the butler to strengthen security and search for any traces of the intruder that might have remained on the territory of the ducal mansion or outside. Edmund promised to take special measures to ensure that such an unfortunate incident did not happen again. The opponents were able to summon monsters, so naturally it was difficult to defend against them, and everyone understood this perfectly well. Perhaps this would settle the situation for now, and Edmund suggested continuing the meal while the principal tried to ask something about the divine blessing. Tristan noticed that the monsters avoided Duke Walker and Julia, and he may not be a very smart person, but he had a good memory. And if it is really done in a blessing, then it loses all meaning since the monster attacked Lady Emily. Emily had suggested taking a chance and guessing, and now the first thing she needed to do was pretend to be miserable and unhappy. Perhaps due to the lack of divine power, the monster did not approach her, and the more careless she behaves, the more they should pity her. For Mr. Tristan, this was actually no secret at all, and he already knew about Emily's abilities. He let it slip, but he didn't think that the girl's talent was insignificant, and asked her to belittle herself. Now it looked like support, but unfortunately the prince did not know that this girl possessed the most powerful dark magic. And the best option now was to pretend to be a sweet, innocent lady who politely thanked Tristan for his kind words. To his surprise, this was the first time he had heard gratitude addressed to him, and he even felt a little embarrassed. He looked away, thoughtfully looking somewhere to the side, and at that moment it seemed as if something happened between them. It was strange, but Tristan seemed to be kinder to this girl, and he wasn't particularly kind to anyone else. He decided to admit it right now, as if he didn't realize what he was saying, and it's good that only his family heard it, otherwise it could have led to a scandal. Considering the personality of the Crown Prince, which she had learned after many years of working for him, she understood that he was not pretending. It was impossible to get this man to have a frank conversation, but now sweet words seemed to flow from his lips. And such things could be easily misunderstood, but Emily just continued to smile sweetly back at him. Suddenly, a loud bang was heard in the living room. It was Isaac slamming his fist on the table, and he was worried why the butler hadn't brought the food yet. The servant promised to prepare everything immediately, and as quickly as possible their conversation dragged on so long that he completely forgot about food. The gentleman noted that the attention and devotion of the ducal family was admirable, and the aroma of delicious fried meat spread late. Lately, Isaac could rarely control his urges if he was overcome by anger. He showed it with his whole appearance. Julia glared at her brother, letting him know that now was not the time to be acting like a zombie. Tristan suggested they begin the magnificent meal, and he could no longer resist that incomparable aroma. After dinner, the first thing Julia did was ask her sister about her relationship with the Crown Prince, and this question seemed unexpected. The girl's face was extremely serious, as if she suspected something was wrong between them. Emily thought for a moment and replied that they only had a boss-employee relationship, as she had been working as a secretary for a long time. And at the same time she said that Tristan was very kind, but this was simple flattery, and Julia did not understand why she was talking such nonsense. Unfortunately, my sister didn't understand that this was necessary for survival in this world, where it was important to choose the right words to build communication. For an unrivaled alchemist genius like Julia, a noble princess who was raised as an alchemist the world had never seen before, this may be an unnecessary skill. For Emily, it was simply necessary, and it is quite possible that her sister will never be able to understand her motives. Julia just wanted to say that she knew her sister was kind by nature, but she was worried that this could cause misunderstanding. Perhaps she was just worried about her, but right now there was such a mess in Julia's head that she didn't understand at all what was happening. The sisters hugged each other, and Julia admitted that the fact that he was the crown prince hardly made him so wonderful, and her sister did not need his useless advice. The sister started to cry, it seemed to irritate her, and she sternly asked the lady to stop treating her like a little child. She also didn't want her beloved sister to be nice to complete strangers who weren't part of the family. Emily smiled and suggested that they go for a walk later to lift their spirits despite the chilly weather. They needed to unwind. If Emily talked about the weather, it meant that the crown prince was standing somewhere nearby, but for some reason Julia forgot about all the signals they had agreed on. She happily offered to take Andrea with her, and felt bad because she hadn't spent enough time with him, and she still didn't get the hint. Emily approached Tristan and suggested going to the beautiful blooming garden, which was located right next to the mansion. Julia looked at him angrily, and Emily asked where the accompanying knight was, why such a respectable gentleman was walking alone. Perhaps because it was Tristan's first time somewhere, he wasn't being followed by omnipresent glances, and he wanted to enjoy a moment of peace. Emily politely suggested that they would go to work together, and at that moment Julia stepped on her foot with all her might. Emily apologized for her insolence, but she also worked in His Highness's office, and all the people would see if she entered the palace with him. Tristan hadn't thought that far ahead, and he should have taken it more seriously for the sake of the ducal family's reputation, and Emily's in particular. The lady suggested that they travel in separate carriages, so that it would be less noticeable, and she admitted that they were worried that they had taken up too much of their precious time. It was as if Julia couldn't listen to these sweet conversations any longer, and even the prince noticed that she looked a little strange. He couldn't help but notice that the girl's foot had been stepped on for a long time, and it was Emily who was trying to make her sister understand that she shouldn't behave like that. Julia felt awkward from this question and didn't even know what to answer the venerable gentleman. She figured she'd recently developed an illness that had suddenly forced her to tap dance, and so Emily was trying to hold her back. Her answer sounded so stupid and absurd that Tristan didn't even want to ask any more questions. Emily wanted to grab her head, not understanding, because there had to be a limit to how weird you could be. The three of them stood there in awkward silence after Lady Julia's answer, and Emily finally managed to calm her down. Julia was awkwardly silent, and she had just blurted out some utter nonsense, and the prince tried to understand whether this was really possible, and he really wanted to believe this girl. Emily was ready to burst into tears of laughter. Even the great Tristan was in disarray, and His Highness might have trouble understanding the mood, but he was no fool. She couldn't just leave this situation like that while Julia was ready to disappear into thin air. To hide her shame, Julia leaned against her sister, and Emily confessed that His Highness might misunderstand her sister had been into dancing for some time. She made a noise, stamping her feet, so that she could rehearse at any time. When it gets carried away by one thing, it cannot control itself. Now Tristan finally understood why the lady wanted to take a long vacation, and this was the most important reason. Emily told a story that for a long time, Julia was only interested in alchemy, so the whole family was very worried, and it was a relief for them that she found a safe hobby. Although now my sister is a little through peace, so it is very difficult to restrain her. It all became clear to the prince that hobbies are indeed important, but it is necessary, first and foremost, to be moderate in everything. Finally, the situation was resolved. Julia admitted that she would definitely keep in mind the words of the venerable gentleman. However, he felt very sorry, because he had long wanted to ask Mrs. Julia to test the new potion. A spark of interest lit up the girl's eyes, and as soon as she heard about this, she could not contain her admiring emotions. Frostwood Forest's keeper sadly died, but while clearing the remains of the forest, an ancient book was found that would be difficult for the average person to understand. The book contained instructions and a recipe for some kind of medicine, and Tristan wanted to ask for Julia's help. The recipe requires holy water, making it highly likely that this is a lost recipe for a potion that was used during the holy battle. Julia explained that if it contained water, the potion could be linked to mana, and that the forest's keeper was a descendant of Saint Eliza, though she didn't understand why the man hadn't revealed the recipe to the world. She was ready to dive into alchemy, brew any recipe, and solve any riddle, and at that moment, Emily stepped on her foot. Having made it clear to her sister that she was not in any condition to practice alchemy right now, had she really forgotten that she had become a zombie? Tristan suggested doing the research. It was quite secret, so they would hardly be able to make an official request. Unable to contain herself, Julia raised her hand high into the air, declaring that she really wanted to take part in this secret study. Emily tried to stop her by suggesting to discuss it with her family, but it was just a gentleman's suggestion, so there was nothing she could do about it. The lady thanked her for her understanding and was sure that Julia would hardly have been able to cope with this task. Dark night fell over the luxurious ducal mansion, and the family gathered to discuss the meeting with the crown prince. Emily told me about Julia and her new hobby, and Isaac couldn't help but burst into hysterical laughter. Now Julia could be called the best tap dancer, which clearly could not be said about the zombies. They were simply disgusting. Julia asked them to stop laughing, and this was the only excuse she could come up with at that moment. In any case, everyone knows she can't practice alchemy in her current state. The incident where Isaac went berserk was due to a failed enhancement to get rid of the side effects. His body would need to be significantly enhanced using more corpses. Edmund asked how much would be needed to make a significant improvement so that they could go out into the world without fear of someone losing an arm or a leg. Emily sadly reported that 5 adult corpses were needed for every zombie, but that was not all. To achieve maximum results, you also need part of the magical beast's carcass, and this is precisely the point that could become a big problem. When he heard about the magical beast, he realized that it would be difficult to implement right away, no matter what. He wanted to try to get the corpses, but now he suggested that Julia accept the offer with the potion. If they couldn't get the corpses, she could simply refuse. The lady was overjoyed. Alchemy had always been her favorite pastime, and she had not done anything for a long time. It was clear that there must have been a clear reason why the forest keeper hid the recipe for this potion, and she suggested that perhaps he wanted to monopolize it, but unfortunately he didn't have time. Saint Eliza gave everything she had to the community and became the guardian of the forest, and such a person clearly cannot be so greedy. Edmund stated there was a reason why it was not revealed, such as if the potion would be useful to a dark wizard. It was not for nothing that the forest keeper tried to hide it, and indeed this reason sounded quite logical. Instead of being useful to the whole world at that time, it may have been suitable for dark magicians, so it was deliberately hidden and not allowed to spread. Doesn't that mean that if it gets developed, it could very well come in handy, and if they can buy time under the guise of research, that would be a win. Julia still couldn't believe that she could really do this research, but only if the experiments were safe. She hugged her brother with all her love, who had given permission, and he promised to try his best to get the bodies, and that was the end of their meeting. The next day, Werner met the gentleman, and the first thing he asked was why His Highness was riding in a separate carriage and not in Emily's carriage. The lady said it would be unseemly for them to be seen in the same carriage, and it was Tristan's fault for not being more careful. Indeed, this could lead to misunderstandings, and Werner thought that since he was accompanying the gentleman, there should be no problems. It seemed to Werner that the suspicions regarding the lady had been resolved, and if there had been anything suspicious, he would have already given the order to search for the Duke's estate. In Werner's opinion, there was no reason to further suspect Emily. Her talent for reading the remnants of dark magic had been proven at the academy, and the Holy See had probably taken the bodies, not wanting to leave evidence. Emily was very kind, affectionate, and smiled a lot at Werner, and such a girl turned out to be soft for him. She is also quite brave, as she protected her little brother from a bloodthirsty monster, sacrificing herself. Therefore, the knight was sure that she was definitely a decent person who should not be doubted. This may indeed have been the case, but Tristan decided that he still needed to check something. And every time he liked to repeat one phrase, a friend to all, a friend to none, and you could expect anything from people. The carriage Emily was riding in today was new and seemed to have been made quite recently, which made him suspicious. There is a tax on the purchase of carriages, which means that if he wants, he can find out how many carriages her family bought. The prince saw no record of the duchy purchasing a new carriage. The carriage was acquired in secret, and this is a very interesting point. The Walker ducal family now held too many secrets, but each of them always acted with caution. That night, Emily met her brothers and sister near a tall tower that towered right before her eyes. She quietly knocked on the door and silently waited for an answer, because today was not an ordinary night. Isaac asked the leaders to enter as quietly as possible. Everyone was dressed in black formal suits, and they had a very important mission. The heroes arrived at the corpse storage department, currently working overtime at the Imperial Palace in anticipation of the Crown Prince's birthday, and this turned out to be the perfect opportunity to get here. There seemed to be about 69 corpses here, and they were in just good condition. Edmund suggested that if they used everything, there would be 20 per person, and that should be enough to return to normal life. Each corpse had a tag on its leg with its name, age, and date of execution. I had to ask someone for help a few days ago so they could get in here. They had to contact Donald. They needed more corpses, and only he could help with this issue. The most powerful man on the black market who can get absolutely anything. Even for someone like Donald, getting his hands on fresh bodies is a bit of a challenge, but giving up was not a word in his vocabulary. The man suggested that perhaps they could use the bodies of executed prisoners so that no one would have any questions. Balan does not use other methods of execution, and the only method was predominantly hanging. If the executed have no apparent family to claim their bodies, they are preserved for a period of time and then cremated on an appointed date. Donald suggested that they take the bodies before the cremation took place and simply leave a note that the cremation had taken place, and that would be the perfect crime. He heard that the corpses were kept in the Imperial Palace, but there weren't even any guards there, since Donald had already planted someone inside. Edmund agreed to this deal and asked how many bodies they would end up with if they went to the tower. The Balan Empire covered a quarter of the continent. It was a huge land, and that said a lot. Donald voiced his answer: there will be as many bodies as the ducal family wants. Therefore, the heroes managed to get into the tower where the bodies of the executed lay without incident, and Edamont felt that his sister was clearly worried. Stroking her head, he asked her not to blame herself under any circumstances, and to just think about her brothers and sisters. This was Emily's first time using so many corpses, but she thought she could definitely handle such a difficult task. She suggested starting as soon as possible before it was too late. Julia, Isaac, and Edmund were ready for the new ritual, and they took it very seriously. The words of the spell wove into an ominous melody, causing the air to tremble with tension, the purple glow intensifying, wrapping itself around the zombies' bodies like a cocoon. Emily concentrated, directing a stream of magic into each of them. The dark mage used her blood as the final catalyst, drop by drop, the crimson liquid falling onto the altar like rain in the underworld. She believed in her powers. Dark, magical energy enveloped the tower and everyone inside, while the lady tried to help her family become normal again. That night, in the ducal mansion, someone could not find peace, trying to find at least some clues. It was the Crown Prince, walking slowly down the dark corridor lit by the Moon Council. It was too quiet here today, as if the owners of the estate had gone somewhere, and he clearly felt as if there was no one here. Everyone in the Duke's family slept little, and he immediately noticed something like this. Even late at night they made noise or wandered through the corridors until dawn, their steps clearly audible in his room. So Tristan realized that it was rather suspicious that night, very quiet, as if everyone was actually sleeping for the first time in all these days. This was his chance to turn the entire Hertz house upside down and examine some of the rooms in an attempt to find something. Tristan wanted to find the records of the carriage's purchase and check the dates, and when he did that, then everything would be crystal clear. He entered the main office and began slowly looking through the papers to find at least some records about the new carriage. It was quite difficult to find them, and it seems that searching for them at night is too much. Today was the perfect time to learn all the secrets, and at that moment a strange object caught his attention. It was the same candlestick that opened the door to the secret corridor, and ours immediately drew attention to it. As soon as he decided to touch the candlestick, he stopped for a moment because a strange rustling sound was heard behind him. It was the demon Leo, who was keeping a close eye on the new inhabitant of the mansion, so that he would not do things that did not concern him. Of course, the prince immediately turned around to see what was happening behind him, seeing a black cat. Tristan didn't even understand how the cat got here, and he didn't even hear how he managed to get here. The demon began to rub gently against the Crown Prince's leg, pretending to be a fluffy and affectionate cat, thereby distracting his attention. Tristan looked mysteriously at the black cat, whose eyes glowed with yellow advice, as if they understood everything. A female voice was heard right outside the office door, probably looking for a cat named Leo. Tristan asked the cat to keep what he saw a secret, and he was sure that an ordinary animal would hardly tell anyone about it. To avoid colliding with anyone in the office, he had to jump out of the window, and at that moment the office door was just about to open. It was the maid Riley, who was looking for the cat and for a long time could not find him anywhere. She gently called him to her, asking where he had gone later that night, and she searched him all over the estate. Riley noticed that, strangely, the door was open, and what seemed even stranger was the open window. She decided to just return to the room, but luckily the demon managed to find out that the Crown Prince was trying to find something here. As he thought, the Crown Prince's heart was as black as pitch, and he immediately suspected this as soon as he stepped into this house. The next day, Riley was in the room with her mistress and decided to immediately report her suspicions to her. She carefully combed her long hair and confessed that something had happened that night. Perhaps it seemed to her, and it was a common little thing, but she decided to report it to the owner so that you would also be aware. That night, when Riley was looking for Lev, she found the door to the Duke's office open, and she went inside just in case, and the window there was also open. Now that it came to mind, Riley confidently stated that there was definitely something strange about it. The lady thanked him for the valuable information and promised to tell Brother Ed about it as soon as possible. That was not all, and some letter arrived for Emily, although the hostess rarely received letters from anyone. Riley took out the envelope, and Emily couldn't even imagine who the letter could be from, since they had seen Hazel recently. The letter was sealed with a blue seal with a blue dove on it, and Emily immediately knew who it was from. Natalie Spencer, one of her 3 closest friends from the academy, and a girl who is practically at the top of high society. The friend knew very well that Emily was always busy, but for some reason she decided to send her a message, and the lady became curious. Natalie wrote to a dear friend that she heard from someone that they met with Hazel without her, and did not even invite her. The lady wrote that perhaps she deserved pity here, and asked her friend to come to the party and would also be glad to see Hazel. Having decided to send the invitation a month earlier because she really wanted to see her, Natalie asked her to attend the upcoming tea party. She recently made a new friend, and she really wanted to introduce her to Emily, so the 3 of them wanted to have tea together to get to know each other better. Natalie had heard a rumor that Emily and the Crown Prince had been traveling to work together a lot lately, and she really wanted to know all the details. Emily asked for a response to her letter, stating that the exact date could be discussed after the celebration. She asked Riley to be sure to add that there was nothing between her and the prince, and there was no need to ask about it. Suddenly, a loud roar was heard from somewhere behind the neighboring rooms, and the ladies jumped in surprise. Emily was seriously scared and jumped up from her seat while Riley was braiding her hair. The noise was clearly coming from the laboratory, and Yulia and the sister rushed to her aid, afraid that something might have happened to her. In the laboratory, she saw huge clouds of smoke that filled the entire room and screamed. It was impossible to see what was going on here, but the worst thing was that Emily couldn't find her sister with her eyes. Clouds of smoke enveloped her from all sides, and the pungent smell was unbearable. Julia apologized, admitting that she had not at all expected that this mixture would suddenly explode. She heard her sister enter the lab, and Emily was so scared that she even wondered if someone had attacked them. Luckily, nothing serious happened. My sister just made a mistake during the experiment and still hasn't gotten used to the feeling in her fingers. Emily rushed to hug her sister, asking her to be careful next time because she had just scared her half to death. But it wasn't just Emily who was scared. A knight appeared at the door and shouted to ask if everything was okay. It was the head of the maintenance department, named Hurl, and his first thought was that someone was attacking them. He burst in with a sword so that he would be ready for battle if anything happened, but Emily asked him not to worry and that it was just Julia's experiment. For some reason, Kirill was incredibly happy to see Lady Julia again in the laboratory because she had not appeared there for a long time. His heart even seemed to lighten, and he was afraid that she had left forever because she had fallen ill. And he was not the last person to be scared by the explosion, and the next hero also heard the loud noise coming from here and immediately came running. It was the Crown Prince, who rushed over immediately to check if everything was all right. The ladies bowed before Tristan, expressing their gratitude, as they had to do every time they saw him. But the gentleman asked her more and more often to greet him formally, and Emily clearly noticed this. He decided to find out what had already happened here, why such a loud explosion had suddenly occurred. Julia stood there with her glasses on and smiled, saying that it was just a normal explosion during an experiment, but there was no need to worry anymore. The gentleman asked Sir Hurl to return back, and he himself decided to stay here for a while to talk with the ladies. Emily was worried that Tristan might be unhappy with how the experiment was going. He just looked at her mysteriously, and seemed to even be worried about her condition. It turned out to be so, because the first thing Tristan asked was if the lady was hurt, and he was worried. Yulia said that she was nearby and came because she was scared and did not get directly caught in the explosion. Tristan warned that next time she would have to assess the situation, and if it had been an assassination attempt, her life could have been in danger. The lady apologized, and she really hadn't thought about it beforehand, but ran headlong into the room. To give her at least some protection, Tristan handed the girl the magic blade and asked her to take it. He was sure that the lady must have at least some kind of weapon so that she could defend herself. Taking the blade, Emily noticed that it appeared to be a custom-made piece, but she didn't know if she could accept something like that. He leaned closer to her and whispered that she should under no circumstances get hurt, because the blades of the weapon were very sharp. Then the Crown Prince left the laboratory and Emily looked at him in surprise, not understanding why he decided to tell her this. He turned to the spinning top, asking if there was any result, and indeed, the lady was getting some results. There was also bad news. Key parts of the recipe were missing, and it might take longer than she thought. When Julia was back doing her favorite thing, she looked completely different, and her sister immediately noticed the changes. Now she was full of life, shining brightly, and her eyes sparkled with unimaginable delight. Perhaps if Emily had not been a dark magician, she would have had exactly the same eyes as Julia. They were twins, but they were not at all alike, and on the one hand, this put incredible pressure on Emily, and she often worried about it. Julia said one part still requires further testing, and if so, an intermediate catalyst will be needed. The lady was saying something about her experiments. Emily only turned away for a second, and Julia was already trying to talk to the prince. Deciding to intervene, she called her sister so that you wouldn't talk too much. She suggested that she check immediately what she had just mentioned before she forgot, and only then proceed to the other part of the experiment. After listening to her sister, Julia decided to try using the reagents they had discussed earlier so that they wouldn't have to encounter Tristan as often. She caught the gentleman's surprised look, which was impossible not to notice. Emily realized that he clearly didn't want to listen to Julia's conversations, and the gentleman nodded his head approvingly, thanking her. If things continued like this, it might not be so bad, and Emily had no idea what could go wrong. And there really was no point in thinking that way. She was completely confident in the proven plan, but unfortunately, events were already unfolding differently. Because soon a priest appeared in the Empire, who was sent here to carry out important tasks, and he was too close to the zombie heroes. A few days later, a gala dinner ball was held, to which Emily and her entire family were invited. Even though the heroes had become zombies, they needed to constantly appear in Soviet society to avoid arousing suspicion. Emily was closely assessing the situation, keeping an eye on her brothers, and it seemed like everyone was doing well without any problems. Even little Andrea came here with his new friend. Julia was not left unnoticed. She was talking to Mr. Rendler again, and it seemed he was still pestering her. The atmosphere was quite favorable, and Emily was incredibly happy that everything was going well. A lady with blue hair approached her, the same Natalie who joyfully exclaimed, "It is impossible not to meet Emily." They started a pleasant conversation. The lady said that she was busy and spending time with her family, and she had heard about Natalie everywhere. This was not surprising, of course. Natalie was the flower of high society, and she never went unnoticed. In the letter, the lady wrote that she would like to introduce her to her new friend, but she seemed to have disappeared. She was just there, and Emily admitted that she probably just shouldn't have been left alone. She wanted to introduce her to the only daughter of Count Swanson, and she was sure that the ladies would definitely get along as soon as they met. The ground seemed to drop out from under Emily's feet when she heard that name. It was about Penelope Swanson. She was the girl who was often sick, so she didn't attend the event as a child, but now she was much better. Emily knew the terrible truth. This definitely couldn't be happening. It was simply impossible, because Penelope really was here. She was sure that Count Swanson's only daughter had been dead for a long time, and she certainly could not be mistaken. Emily once personally came to her funeral and did not understand how Natalie could forget about it, and how this was even possible. Somehow the situation felt painfully familiar, a dead person suddenly coming back to life, and now Emily really wanted to see her. Natalie was incredibly happy that the lady agreed, especially since she took it with such interest. Emily didn't understand what it was, and it was only possible to find out when she met Penelope, who should have been decomposing in her coffin long ago. The guests were announced that His Highness the Crown Prince had entered the room, and silence reigned in the hall. Tristan was unsurpassedly elegant. Distinguished guests greeted him with respect, and his refined manners could not go unnoticed. He cast his gaze upon all the ladies who bowed their heads before the great prince. From the top floor, the prince thanked those present for coming to the birthday celebration, asking them to simply rejoice and enjoy the banquet. The event was truly fascinating, with some presenting gifts to the prince and the sacred choir singing songs. The most important parts were left behind, so Emily decided that after talking a little more, she could finally leave. For some reason, with each passing hour she felt more and more weak, and soon she began to feel very nauseous. Deciding to get some fresh air, which she was sure would definitely help, Emily left the banquet hall. She stepped out onto the balcony, enveloped in fragrant green trees, and guessed that perhaps it was because she hadn't slept all night. With each breath of fresh air, I actually stopped a little easier, but at that moment, someone else appeared on the balcony. As it turned out, the crown prince was already here, and it seemed the lady had arrived here before he arrived. She didn't expect to see him here at all, but she was sure the honorable gentleman was busy with congratulations. The heroine asked to simply call her Emily, because there is another lady of the Walker house here. The Prince of Hesitation agreed to do just that. He saw nothing wrong with it if they dropped the familiarity. Emily congratulated Tristan on his birthday once again. She sent her gift to the Imperial Treasury, and he should arrive soon. Lately, she noticed that the gentleman was incredibly fond of mint tea, but it was quite difficult to find in their time, since trade routes were blocked. Tristan always seemed emotionless, but he was easy to read, and now he was clearly wondering how she knew about it. The gentleman usually pretended to drink tea, but in reality he loved mint tea exclusively, and in her opinion, this was obvious. No one before Emily had been so attentive to the prince, and he could not help but notice it. He seemed to be getting closer and closer, and looking at him, Emily realized she urgently needed to go somewhere. She apologized for her rudeness and decided to leave, but the gentleman asked the lady to wait. There were too many eyes watching them now, and for some reason the young man decided to tell her about it. The music would soon change, and he asked the ladies to come back after that, when the dancing began, so that no one would pay attention to them. She had probably heard rumors spreading before, but Emily didn't think the gentleman knew about them either, and they were probably just making things up after they had been investigating together. Emily suggested that this was probably causing the gentleman some discomfort, and perhaps they should avoid meeting together. Standing close to her, he admitted that there was no need for this, and he was certainly not afraid of stupid rumors. Suddenly the music changed. Emily decided that she had better get back to the hall where her zombie relatives remained as soon as possible. Without turning around, she ran towards them to check, and for some reason her heart was pounding wildly. Perhaps she was just nervous, but perhaps something had really changed between her and the prince lately. The heroine couldn't understand what was going on, but she clearly felt it. The sensation was becoming much worse than her nerves. With every step she took, it seemed to be becoming more and more difficult for her to breathe, and her head was spinning very badly. And she didn't even realize how she reached the first wall she came across, leaned against it, and was ready to faint right there. For some reason she felt incredibly ill. She started shaking, and someone came up to her and asked if everything was okay with her. It was that same blue-eyed priest who noticed that the girl looked unwell, and now the dark magician turned out to be just prey that had fallen into the predator's field of vision. The priest's name was Zion, and he could not leave the poor girl without attention, because he was used to helping everyone. He told Paolo that the lady was very ill. She could hardly say a word, but the closer the divine power was to the dark magician, the worse he felt. Paolo asked the priest not to worry, as His Holiness had to go and give his blessing to the crown prince. Zion was sure the lady would be better if he shared some of his divine power with her, and Emily was afraid that she might die from it. The Great Blessing is a grueling ritual, and Zion cannot waste divine power on such a trifle before such an important event. But the priest sincerely believed that the Almighty always said that first we must save the people who are nearby, and only then help others. Emily didn't understand why all the priests decided to argue with each other if they were united by the same faith. She found some strength in herself and quietly said, "She is completely fine, and it is a great honor to meet His Holiness in person." She needed the priest to go somewhere far away, but the assistant kept insisting on continuing his work. Zion took the lady's hands, confessing that in that case he could not do anything, and asked the lady not to overwork herself anymore and to rest. He only said, "May blessings always accompany her in everything she does and in her health." Emily was almost ready to faint, but she had to endure this test. Finally, the two left, and the dark mage Emily was able to exhale. All this time, Zion couldn't stop thinking about that young aristocrat, and really wanted to know who she was. Paolo said this is the daughter of the Walker house, the third and fourth daughters are twins, and it seems that this is the fourth named Emily. For some reason she attracted his attention. His kind heart seemed to want to help this girl. His assistant even offered that if the priest so desired, he could personally arrange a personal meeting with her. Paolo refused this offer and was sure that fate itself would bring them together. He felt something strange, but it certainly couldn't be, and perhaps he was wrong in his assumptions. He asked to arrange a personal audience with His Highness the Crown Prince for tomorrow, and that was the first reason he came here. The grand ball in honor of the prince's birthday celebration continued, and couples tirelessly waltzed to live music. All this time, Julia stood near the wall. She didn't want anything at all. She suddenly began to feel bad. The lady even suggested that perhaps she was drunk, but zombies are unlikely to get drunk on a couple of glasses of wine. The state was simply impossible to feel. Julia held her head and tried to at least stay on her feet. Edmund, who approached her, also looked unwell. His skin was deathly pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The situation started unexpectedly. No one understood what was happening, and Julia decided to ask Emily. She had decided for now to just say that she felt unwell and go back, and that was the best option, but Isaac still disappeared somewhere. Looking into the crowd, the brother and sister tried to find Isaac because he was the most angry of them. Despite her poor condition, Julia could still understand at least something which could not be said about her brother. She approached him, but he seemed not to hear her at all and was heading somewhere completely incomprehensible. Loud applause broke out in the hall, and it was announced that Saint Zion had been invited here to celebrate His Highness's birthday. As soon as Emily heard about the saint, she immediately understood everything. The most powerful divine force would appear right in this hall. She held Isaac's hand tightly because she knew that at any moment he could start acting like a real zombie, but the saint was already ready to go out to the guests. None of them could have expected this. Zombies cannot resist divine powers, and Emily looked at her brother in fear. A vicious grin appeared on his face, and he looked more and more like a living dead man. It drove her crazy, and to bring her brother to his senses, she hit him hard on the head once. This irritated her incredibly, but unfortunately it was impossible to resist the zombie's habits, and now Julia needed to hide it. She poked him in the eyes with all her anger, saying that he had better close them for a while so as not to irritate her with his antics. Julia didn't notice how she began to get very angry and hit her brother on the leg to stop him from twitching. After such a brutal family beating, Isaac began to look even more like a disheveled zombie who had just been beaten, especially since. Luckily, his sanity returned, and that was exactly what Julia was trying to achieve until he asked her to finally stop. Edmund stood to the side and watched what was happening. Julia was looking for Emily, but unfortunately she could not find her anywhere. Their thoughts were only about one thing: how to quickly leave the banquet hall, where the priest was supposed to appear right now. Putting on happy faces, they took each other's friends and decided to go home, but at that moment they were informed of the arrival of the saint. They didn't have time to reach the exit. A terrible sensation pierced the body of every zombie, because a priest was already standing on the second floor. Feeling the divine power on their backs, each of them wanted to furiously tear this priest into pieces while he was still alive. Julia tried to pull herself together, realizing that if she too lost control, it could turn into a real disaster. And she had less and less strength left, and if they were caught, everyone would find out that they were real zombies, and all her relatives would simply die. Zombie Julia was already dead. If this continued, she would end up killing someone she should never touch, but really, she shouldn't. The guests in the hall continued to converse, and everyone was waiting for the main speech of the priest, who had arrived here to congratulate the crown prince. Emily stared into the room, and the real state of affairs turned out to be much worse than she could have expected. Edmund was standing against the wall, unable to move, and it was a complete disaster. Also, somewhere in the center of the hall stood Julia and Isaac. They stood motionless, and Emily understood that at any moment they could turn into real zombies. In this case, it was unlikely that anything could be done, so it was necessary to do something right now. The priest greeted all the guests present, raising his hand upwards, a gesture of gratitude. Emily had no other option but to turn to the demon Leo, who must always be near his mistress. She called upon him to help the demon sort out the situation in order to save her beloved brothers and sister. The demon's help was needed, and she asked to be told how to get her brothers and sister out of here so that they wouldn't be caught, and they would hardly be able to do it on their own. The demon immediately realized that there was a light one in the hall, and it was impossible not to notice. He knew that he felt an unpleasant presence, and for every dark magician, or even more so a demon, the presence of an opposing force was a test. Lev was indignant. Did the lady really think that he was some kind of lamp that fulfilled wishes? After all, there are such demons, but this is not his specialty. Now Emily knew the situation was dire and she just wanted to hear an answer. The demon stated that he could not do anything for his mistress because he was not the master of these guys who had become zombies. Because Emily was their rightful mistress, and they were her familiars who had to obey her. If Emily wants them to suppress their instincts and obey her, she must give the order, and then the servants will kneel before her and swear allegiance. All she had to do was order her family to carry out her will, that's all. The demon confirmed that her soul and the zombie bodies were connected by the thread of master and servant, so she could indeed give them orders. It was a master-servant relationship, but Emily saw it as something terrible because they were still her family. Watching her brothers and sisters slowly being consumed by their instincts, she knew she had no time to hesitate. Having gathered her strength, the heroine decided to try this option because there were no others left. She mentally gave the order for the zombies to stop moving to see if it worked or not. Her hands were shaking. She had never done anything like this before, and now she needed to give another order. The zombies moved their legs like dolls, and the owner mentally ordered them to go home as quickly as possible. Emily really wanted it to help, and the next moment she just sat on the floor, completely exhausted. This ball turned out to be very difficult, but everything would have been just great if a saint hadn't appeared and managed to ruin everything. The next day, the lady came to work, but heard some strange conversations right outside her office. The knight claimed that it was impossible for a saint to get to the meeting without an appointment, but for some reason Paolo was there. She felt that aura again, and she couldn't do anything because dark magic was flowing through her veins, and it was simply impossible to resist. She certainly didn't expect to see a priest here early in the morning, who for some reason called her by name. The young man approached the lady and asked if she remembered him. Just yesterday they had seen each other at the Crown Prince's ball. Of course she remembered everything. It was impossible to forget this meeting, because it seemed like she still felt sick from his mere presence. Zion actually had something urgent to convey to the prince, but it was said that he would have a hard time finding the time. He asked Emily if it was really impossible, since his request could only take a minute. It wasn't something Emily could do as a secretary, and she admitted she suddenly felt even worse. Barely containing her intense nausea, the lady admitted that she had not heard anything about His Highness the Crown Prince's new meeting schedule. Zion simply walked in and asked for an audience, and it seemed he didn't even give any advance notice of his visit. It wasn't easy to get to the Crown Prince, but for some reason Zion continued to stand and talk to Emily. Everything had to be according to the rules, no exceptions for saints, but Emily had no other choice now. She politely invited Zion to follow her into the office to ask him some important questions. She was getting worse with each passing minute, but after yesterday's ball, Emily had already been diligently holding back these attacks. She asked Zion to sit down and what kind of tea he preferred, but the priest didn't need anything, since he was just a guest who had dropped in for a short while. The Crown Prince especially hates anything that goes against his expectations, and such an unexpected visit would leave the worst possible first impression, but perhaps that doesn't matter, since he has the entire Vatican on his side. Zion again spoke his name. He was only a humble servant, so the name was enough. Emily didn't want any familiarity at all. She didn't care what she called him, as long as he left here as soon as possible. The young man confessed that he had run away today, and if Father Paolo found out, he would have big problems. The Vatican believes that appealing to the imperial family is, first and foremost, a defeat, so doing so is strictly forbidden. Emily knew that a saint was not allowed to act against the will of the Vatican. For some reason, the young man decided to act on his own, and there was definitely a good reason for this. The lady might have thought that this was not quite the behavior of a saint, and it was all too obvious from her face. Zion admitted that there are simply things that bother him much more than this fact, and a lot depends on it. At that moment, Tristan appeared in the office and stated that he would never have thought that a priest would come to him personally. Mr. Tristan never liked it when people came to him without warning, and this meeting was no exception. It might seem rude on his part, but he needed to meet the prince today, and he asked for at least a little time. Tristan wasn't sure about that, and he didn't want to waste time on empty talk, especially without his consent. Entering the office, he asked Werner to politely escort the saint out of here and was to follow his instructions. The young man did not want to give up. He asked the gentleman to spare some time for him at least next time, and he was sure that lunch or dinner would be enough. It wasn't about negotiations. He came here because of a matter that was also important for the Crown Prince, but Tristan suggested discussing everything at an official meeting. The gentleman was quite vigilant, and Emily didn't even think that in fact he was so cold, as if he were strictness itself. Then in the carriage he said that it was unusual to meet uninvited guests, and he did not like it at all. When Emily asked if such things happened often, the gentleman said that the thought of the son of heretics one day becoming emperor was unbearable. Now it was very clear to her why Mr. Tristan felt this way about the Vatican. Suddenly, Zion stated that the matter concerned dark magicians, and naturally, these words could not help but attract the attention of the Crown Prince. He asked what the priest meant when he said he wanted to raise the topic of dark magical forces. Zion knew that the Crown Prince had recently been looking for suspicious people, but the Vatican did not officially speak about it. The young man said that dark magicians had recently started to act again, and he would hardly have come to ask for help. Zion came to ask for help in the fight against the dark evil forces, and they had only one hope, the help of the Crown Prince. Tristan never expected that the priest himself would ever ask him for help in the fight against the dark forces. Emily suggested that it would be better to leave them for a private conversation, but the Crown Prince did not need that. He clearly heard Zion's opinion, but wondered how he could trust the words of a saint from the Vatican. The young man confessed that the gentleman had no choice but to simply take his word for it, because this was a mortal weakness in the Vatican. The barrier on Thanatos Island is slowly crumbling, and this secret has been kept a closely guarded secret. Tristan did not understand why the priest came in person and decided to tell him everything without warning His Holiness about it. Zion sincerely asked for help in exterminating the dark magicians on this land, and for this purpose he was ready to help in any way and do anything. For him, the only justice was punishing dark mages, and at that moment, Emily felt a strong tremor, and this made life as a dark mage even more difficult. Tristan asked if justice lay in destruction. Since the desire corresponded to his, there was no reason at all not to cooperate. Emily realized with horror that Tristan was now also interested in destroying the dark magicians, and what's more, he had found an ally. This was exactly what Zion had hoped for, and between them now stood Emily, who was the very dark mage they were going to destroy. The young man inquired how long the priest planned to stay in the Empire, but unfortunately nothing had been decided for sure yet. Since the negotiations with His Highness were successful, he decided to stay here for a while longer. Suddenly, a strange noise was heard outside the door, and the heroes immediately turned their attention, staring intently at the entrance. Werner suggested that it seemed the priest who had come to see the saint was causing a disturbance. This meant only one thing: it seemed that the priest Paolo had arrived, since Zion had left without his permission. Since he too was connected to the Vatican, the young man admitted he needed to go, and the hereditary principal suggested discussing the details later. Zion was pleased that the negotiations had been successful and expressed great respect for the populated principal. Tristan responded in kind, meaning that a new chapter in their plan was now beginning. The first thing he did was turn to Emily and ask her to schedule a private meeting with the saint for the next available date. After the conversation, Tristan sat down at his desk and seemed to feel completely unwell. And nothing would help here better than deliciously aromatic mint and tea, which calms the nervous system and has a beneficial effect on health. It was Emily's fault that she thought that mint tea would definitely be a welcome addition to the gentleman's diet. He was surprised that she understood this, but all this time he was touching his forehead, and every time he does this, he asks for mint tea. It was too obvious, and observation was her little hobby, so she knew a lot about other people. Other scribes might not have known anything, so it was hard to say, but here it was obvious. It all came together in a very funny way, as if Emily was slowly putting together a puzzle that was beginning to form into one complete picture. For example, serving different appetizers and monitoring which ones the Crown Prince particularly likes. And then give special attention to his loved ones, order again the fountain pen that he likes, or fill the room with his favorite scent. Of course, even if it is something he particularly likes, his reaction always remains valuable and sincere. Whatever it was, for Emily, it was at least some joy in this deadly boring job, and the master's thoughts could not be read from his face. Only, she knew what he really needed now, because she had skills and respected her boss. Tristan wanted to tell her something, and almost started to say some words, and Emily was ready to listen to him attentively. A slight blush appeared on his cheeks. He changed his mind about asking the question, and only quietly said, "The lady is incredibly kind to everyone, and they should better get back to work." The next day, Emily was invited to tea by Natalie, who was incredibly happy to see her again. Penelope had to go home early from the prince's birthday banquet because of something very urgent, but Natalie assured them they could have fun now. Penelope's voice came from very close by, and it was the girl Emily remembered from school. Surprisingly, she was alive and well, looking just fine, and the lady gave her name, Penelope Swanson. Emily immediately realized that this man was a dark mage, and even without knowing that she was a fraud who had deceived her friend, she immediately felt a kinship with her. Leo said that Emily hid her magical power well, even the saint did not catch her, and she was interested in what kind of magician Penelope was. Penelope smiled and politely asked to come inside so that the grand tea party for the ladies could finally begin. A red velvet carpet decorated the luxurious mansion. Penelope walked in front, and Emily walked with Natalia. There was no reaction from Penelope, and as the lady thought, she did not notice anything, but now she needs to be careful not to reveal herself today. The table was laden with sweet treats, and the servants were well prepared to organize the tea party. Penelope announced that Lady Emily and Lady Natalie had finally arrived and asked the other girls to greet them. The ladies smiled and greeted each other politely. Some of them had not seen each other for a long time, but all knew who Lady Walker was. The conversation flowed naturally, with someone inquiring about the stunning aroma of the tea, which was made from herbs that Penelope had recently grown herself. Emily watched the situation closely, watching every girl whose face she recognized. The girls who graduated from the same academy with her seemed to have no idea about the death of the Count's daughter, and Emily immediately realized that the dark magician Penelope had distorted everyone's memories using magical power. Natalie admitted that Penelope had been saying for a long time that she would really like to meet Lady Walker, but she never had the opportunity. Seeing that the girls had finally met, Penelope admitted that she felt incredible pride. Penelope herself admitted that she would like to get closer to Emily, and asked if she would mind if she called her by her first name. Human relationships are really interesting. They hardly spoke at the academy, and Penelope admitted that she was in poor health at the time. The heroine decided to ask how Penelope became friends with Natalie, since they didn't even communicate at the academy. Natalie started telling the story. She went out to get some fresh air at Lady Elijah's party, and on the terrace by chance, but then suddenly stopped. She seemed to be at a loss as to what to say next, only asking how they had met. Natalie looked at Emily with bottomless white eyes. She tilted her head to the side, repeating one question: how did they meet? How did they meet? Penelope reacted quickly to this moment. She stood up from her seat and admitted that she was very sorry. She walked up to Natalie, grabbed her by the shoulders, and asked if the same thing had happened again. Her friend didn't seem to react to her words, and Penelope continued to ask if her friend didn't remember how she met her. At that meeting, she accidentally spilled wine on her dress, and it looked like Penelope was deliberately forcing Natalie to think the way she wanted. As if enchanted, Natalie repeated her words: the wine, the dress, their first meeting. It wasn't surprising. Penelope had dark powers and simply made people say the thoughts she put into their heads. She snapped her fingers and pretended nothing had happened, at which point Natalie began to act like herself again. Penelope was sure Emily shouldn't notice this, but the heroine understood everything perfectly and saw it with her own eyes. As if waking up, Natalie cheerfully began to tell how Penelope had stained her dress with wine, and that this was their first meeting. Emily admitted that this meeting was like a scene from a novel, but with each passing minute I felt more and more uneasy in Penelope's presence. Natalie thought it was funny, but Emily knew there was no trace of her friend left here, and everyone present was being controlled by dark magic. It was mind control, an ability that allowed her to influence the memories and minds of those around her, and that's probably how she convinced the Count and Countess Swanson, not to mention the young ladies. If Emily shows any sign of remaining conscious, she's unlikely to be able to jump out of here. With such an ability, perhaps even if she simply disappeared, no one would notice, but fortunately, the same dark magician. Suddenly, Penelope asked, "Everything is very strange, and why he is not interested in such a girl." She did not know the reason. It irritated her, but the heroine did not understand who she was talking about now. Penelope suggested that the ladies finish their tea at this point, and it did not last long. She admitted that she was very pleased to meet her. It was the most terrible tea party that the heroine had to attend. Smiling and not showing it, the lady admitted that it was simply a wonderful time spent, and she was very happy with the new acquaintance. Emily was finally sitting in the carriage, with the crown prince and the saint on one side, and the dark mage on the other, and the zombies to hide in the middle. It all seemed too tiring for her. Penelope watched the carriage leave. The servants lined up behind her, their heads bowed. The lady said she couldn't do it anymore. Such things didn't suit her character at all. Penelope couldn't understand why they were making such a fuss over a cup of tea, when noble ladies and their noisy bustle were something else entirely. She turned to Herman, who was standing among the others, and probably wanted to ask him for something. Herman also looked like a real zombie, and with a trembling voice asked why the lady was calling him. The lady stated that he hadn't noticed yet that she was standing in heels right now, and that he probably had to do something about it. She loved to bully the servants, and for Penelope this was the only joy, to anger the people around her. Herman had to kneel down to get Penelope to sit on him like a chair, despite the fact that there were other chairs nearby. She wanted to get rid of the dark magicians, but they were all at a disadvantage, and a saint from the Vatican had also recently arrived. The lady was indignant that Herman decided to answer her questions, since she hadn't asked for it at all. She was so irritated, and did Herman really want to test her character further, that he only apologized dryly. If there was still no contact, Penelope simply wasn't going to sit and wait forever and could go and punch this guy in the nose herself. Grabbing Herman by the hair, Penelope declared that among the girls who had come earlier, she had found suitable bait. It was about the only handicapped member of the Walker family, and Penelope was sure it would definitely be fun. Luckily, Emily managed to unlock her dark magical powers, and the new carriage was already approaching her house. Edmund came out to meet her, saying that the lady had arrived just in time, and he had recently heard something. A house dedicated to dark magic was going to be auctioned off at an illegal auction, and the brother tried to secure tickets as quickly as possible. He held a black masquerade mask in his hands. It might be tiring, but since it would be useful for her sister, he was sure it was worth it for everyone to go together. Emily desperately needed this book to improve her skills and perhaps someday bring her family back to life. It was a monthly auction where you could buy a unique, one-of-a-kind item. The Walker Duke family was a classy family, and disguises were a great way for them to hide their identities, but today they looked like some kind of dangerous organization. Since they said the masks would help keep their identities hidden, there was nothing they could do about it, but it still felt a little suffocating to Emily. Just in case, she took a subspace pocket in which she could hide something and put important things there. Someone stopped Emily and asked her to wait, and she was afraid that someone would really ask her stupid questions now. The masked young man said that this was the entrance for guests, and the lady needed to go to the entrance for employees in the other direction. For some reason, he took her for his own. Lara went into a secluded room where there was absolutely no one. She heard a voice. The young man asked if she was a new worker and asked her to follow him, and she came much earlier than he expected. Emily wondered why everyone was acting like this, but because of that mask, they really did now mistake her for a worker. The young man said that she had been assigned to the lot storage, and she must have already heard the details. Emily asked to explain again, and at that time Julia and her brothers were puzzled as to where their sister had mysteriously disappeared to. No one understood. Just a moment ago she was following them, the auction had already begun, and the host asked the guests to take their seats. An announcement was made over the microphone. The first lot was a cursed diamond, about which there were an incredible number of legends. Many of the lots were already ready and were gradually brought onto the stage, while the staff responsibly carried out their work. The main girl was giving orders, and no one noticed that Emily wasn't an employee. She decided to take advantage of this opportunity and changed into the staff uniform with its shiny embroidery and asked what instructions awaited her. The young man asked to check the inventory a second time, but the second check was standard for such things. By giving her a book with the names of the items that were in the lots, he was confident that she could definitely handle it on her own. On the first page, she immediately found what she needed. It was item number 183, the volume on dark magic that she had come here for. Delighted that she would now be able to get to him first, Emily politely promised the employee to double-check everything, and her luck was surprisingly good. Upon entering the secret room, Emily immediately saw the necessary book, which was shrouded in a magical spell for safety, as well as chains. She heard that this book was taken from the tomb of a saint, which is why it was cursed so that no one could get to it. Judging by the security around the tome on dark magic, it was genuine, no doubt about it, and once she found out whether it was genuine or not, she should go back. When she wanted to go back out with the book, she certainly didn't expect to see pools of blood and bodies of people scattered all over the room. Something had clearly happened here. The smell of blood was simply unbearable, and Emily knew someone was standing behind her. A man's voice whispered in her ear what he should do now. It seemed to her that Emily had heard this voice somewhere before. When she turned around, she saw the same man with blue eyes in a robe, and it became clear that all this time he had been closely watching her life. The young man cut down all the people who were there with his sword and declared that the beautiful lady with pink hair was definitely lucky not to get caught. They stood opposite each other, strangers who seemed to have been brought together by more than just fate. It was that man, and last time he immediately recognized Emily and approached her, and it was no wonder why he was standing here now. The stranger said that they should have waited a little longer inside, because by then he would have already left, and they would hardly have crossed paths. He wasn't someone Emily could talk to buy herself time. She felt his strong aura, and for the first time she was truly afraid that she might die. It was no accident that he cut up all the people with a blade, and he was clearly looking for something here. His energy pulsed through the air like a pent-up storm, ready to unleash its full fury. His gaze piercing and cold as the winter wind slid over her, making her shudder. He touched her face and with one movement removed the mask, while Emily was completely unable to resist or do anything. When he saw her face, he immediately realized who she was and said that he did not even expect to see the Duke's daughter here. Now she was really scared. He saw her confidence through the mask, revealing fear and uncertainty. Emily clenched her fists, trying to hold back her trembling. The stranger in the black cloak admitted that this was causing even more trouble than he expected, and suggested that they simply pretend they didn't know each other. Emily wondered if he was going to kill her, and on the contrary, he asked her to do the same for him. So far, killing Emily was not really part of his plans, and all this was until he checked out another case. Touching her hair, the young man felt a strange aura and declared that Emily was a little different from other people. He was the first one who managed to recognize her. He saw a meeting with someone like him, but this could hardly be a conscious lady, so he doubted whether it was worth killing her right now. The stranger had another option, which he decided to voice. He asked if she could become a worthy human pet that he would be happy to take in. At the most opportune moment, people broke out and shouted for the gentleman to raise his hands up and surrender, as he was surrounded. The guards, drawing their swords, asked the criminal to surrender peacefully without incident. Having returned the mask to Emily, the young man declared that perhaps he had gotten carried away, but he was unlikely to forget that charming face. He understood that if he stayed here even for a moment longer, he would be arrested, and that was precisely why he needed to disappear. One of the young men shouted, wondering if the stranger still didn't understand the situation, but it turned out he didn't care at all. A powerful dark mage in a hooded robe forced all the guards to behave completely differently with just one snap of his fingers. Blood began to flow from under the mask of one of them, and it took only a moment for the dark magician to simply kill the people. Someone started coughing and choking, but one thing was clear: he shouldn't approach anyone at all to do his dirty work. With a sense of duty accomplished, the Dark Lord finally decided to leave, and this meeting turned out to be unforgettable. He came here with one purpose, and immediately approached the book surrounded by chains, which Emily also needed. Standing next to the magic book, the young man declared that he was simply returning to his rightful owner and asked Emily not to deceive herself. She understood that if she used dark magic on this person, he would immediately reveal it, and then he would learn the secret of how the brothers and sister returned to life. There was no way this could happen. It was as if there was no way out, but she wasn't ready to just lose the tome on dark magic. Emily asked, before he took the book and left, if he could ask her just one question. There was a radio lying right under her feet. Emily had an interesting idea and asked the stranger's name. He paused for a moment, thinking that Emily wouldn't do anything to him, and was ready to give his name. At this time, she turned on the radio behind her back. The young man's name was Laud, and it seemed to him that in fact she was not particularly interested in him. The lady replied that knowing the other person's name was basic etiquette, especially if they were stage partners. By pressing a button, she loudly announced that a lot with a certain number was ready and could be sent onto the stage right in front of all the other lots. Claude didn't understand what the lady was up to and why she was doing this, and couldn't just up and leave. The auction house prefers to raise the most significant lots in the simplest, even the most banal way. Suddenly, the floor began to spin under Claude's feet, and he felt as if he was about to fly out onto some stage. He was indeed not mistaken, the presenter said loudly. The lot that they are ready to present this time is nothing other than the most unexpected item that will simply be impossible to get anywhere. The curtains opened and Emily appeared before the guests with a walkie-talkie in her hands, a magic tome, and Claude, standing in a robe. The guests were puzzled as to what was going on there, and it seemed that there were some problems with the storage of the lots. An ominous laugh echoed throughout the hall, and Claude realized that it was the stupid girl who actually wanted to do this. His cold blue eyes flashed, and he declared that it was truly driving him crazy. For some reason, the young lady continues to perform strange tricks, although she could simply stop and calm down. She asked Claude not to be deceived. The volume was returning to its rightful owner, and these were the very words he spoke before he wanted to take the book. Claude agreed and was eager to find out who would win this battle between the dark magicians and who would get this ill-fated book. In the hall, all the guests did not understand what was happening and why the curtains on the new lot had not yet opened. Yulia couldn't find a place for herself, why her sister hadn't arrived yet, since the auction had already started a long time ago. The presenter announced that urgent news had arrived and that the lot that had been saved for last would have to be presented right now. He announced that the item had returned to them after 300 years, and Julia realized that he was talking about that very book. A volume on dark magic called Lemmigaton appeared before the audience, and Emily, dressed in an employee uniform, and an unknown young man appeared on stage. Claude wanted to disappear without a trace, but Emily screamed loudly for the guards to pounce directly on the man who wanted to steal the book. Things were really going wrong for him, and he just wanted to go away quietly and peacefully. The knights rushed to catch the man who definitely shouldn't have been there, and Emily watched the whole time. Hearing Julia's voice, she turned around to see her running with her brothers straight towards her. She was standing on the top floor. It was very dangerous here, so they decided to get out as quickly as possible, and her brother suggested that they jump and catch her. It looked like a scene from an action movie. The lady landed successfully in Isaac's arms, and he deftly grabbed her. Yulia screamed out where she had been all this time, what she had been doing, and why she was even wearing an employee uniform. Something incredible was happening in the hall. Claude seemed to be trying to sort things out with everyone, while loud cries for help were heard here. The Walker ducal family decided to listen to Emily's explanation later, but for now, everyone needed to run, and as quickly as possible. The guests were panicking, the auction room was in chaos, and all the doors were locked. The exit was already packed with people. It was difficult to pass this way, and now it was Isaac's turn to show his strength. Isaac always said, "If there is no passage, make your own, and you can continue to enjoy the happy victory." Now that he had an incredible amount of strength, he kicked the entire wall above him and smashed it into tiny pieces. He grabbed Julia by the other arm, and this way it would be faster to get out than if the ladies ran on their own. They managed to get out very quickly. Isaac ran quite far, and was sure that now they would definitely not be followed. Edmund noted that it seemed like his brother had recovered his physical abilities well, and even he still couldn't catch his breath. Isaac ran at full speed for the first time, although there were still some shortcomings compared to the last one, but he still felt much better. Ever since her second brother's body became as fragile as a sheet of paper, Emily had completely forgotten about it. Isaac was a knight for a reason, and he trained hard for a long time and was quite successful. Isaac was a knight's son, with incredible skills enough to make him a candidate for the next commander of the Imperial Knights. The source of this talent is the innate talent of the members of the Walker Duke family, and it could even be called inhuman strength. His physical abilities were truly monstrous, but given the circumstances, there was probably no need to improve his skills. There was a loud explosion, and it was clearly coming from the place where the illegal auction had just taken place. Therefore, he noted that with such a stir, the Imperial family would probably take up the investigation, and it was good that they had managed to escape. Julia asked who the man was, and he looked incredibly suspicious. Emily thought about it and decided that perhaps this man was the leader of a group of dark magicians, and Julia was outraged that she had to deal with this dangerous man alone. He had no intention of touching the Walker family. He wasn't trying to kill her, so there was no reason to worry. The brother asked the sisters not to quarrel, because Emily did not even imagine that she would be able to meet him. Emily said that one of the workers mistook her for a new employee and sent her to the warehouse, and since this happened, she just wanted to check if the House of Dark Magic really exists. She had no idea that this man would be there, and her brother must have remembered him, because that day, returning to the meeting with Donald, she saw him for the first time. It was the man in the black hooded robe, and the brother immediately understood what was being talked about. Then nothing happened for sure, and if my sister said so, it really was true. In any case, since it was clear what had happened this time, he needed to hear every detail in detail. Emily suggested going home and telling all the details there, because the goal was to get the tome on dark magic, and she succeeded. They had no other choice. The auction house was now in a sad state. Speaking of black magic tomes, Emily admitted she took it with her. The brothers and Julia certainly didn't expect that she would be able to get to the book that she so desperately needed. And now all that remained was to understand whether Claude had noticed the loss of the volume on dark magic, since he had come specifically for it. It didn't take Claude long to kill all the people, furiously and cruelly. Right in front of him lay mountains of corpses. The auction hall was completely covered in blood. He had no intention of leaving without the volume, and he wondered if some cheeky little creature had eaten it or hidden it inside itself. He sorted through them by hand in vain hope, but alas, the volume was not there, and Claude wondered if he could have grown legs. Suddenly, he remembered his meeting with the Duke's daughter, and she was definitely in this room for a reason. It was hard to understand that it was she who took this volume, and Claude laughed. The lady really turned out to be interesting. It was the first time he had experienced such an emotion towards a person, and was this really how sympathy between people began? Guards began storming the auction house, and the unit prepared to enter. For Claude, there were too many useless people here today, like cockroaches, and he found it disgusting. The young man pulled up his hood, turned around and prepared to leave, but the lady still occupied his thoughts. However, now he had to calm down and just wait until everything was prepared perfectly so that he could finally get the right book and perform the ritual.